Board members, thank you for your patience. Welcome back. Sometimes, as you know, these days can get difficult being in these chairs for such a long time. So appreciate the ability to get up and stand for a minute. Okay, so we're on agenda item 12. This is our general legislative session preparation. And before we jump in here, before we do the overview, Elise, if it's okay, and I don't know where Vice Chair Wood went. If she stepped away, she needs to keep me in line here. Just so the board's aware, Vice Chair Wood is going to chair the legislative meetings similar to what we did last year. Apparently you guys made it easy for her and she loved it, so now she's going to do it again. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great thing. But I wanted to let you know, similar to last year, we discussed bills throughout the session, and there were a few times where board members were able to take some of our discussion back to legislators and have a meaningful conversation where meaningful change was able to occur. And we'd like to do something similar this year as well, rather than just simply voting. And sometimes we do have to vote yes or no on a bill, or vote in support or not support, and we get that. But if they're in those instances where we feel that we can make a difference, we would like to have that discussion, and then maybe assign through maybe a voluntold system of 3 to 5 board members who might be willing to meet with these lawmakers and help get our concerns or support out there. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then I know Vice Chair Wood told me that, hey, don't forget to say this. And it's about she did a survey last year. I'm going to let her speak to this because I think it's great. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Wood, if that's okay. I'll put you on the spot here. Go ahead.
So I don't know if y'all recall, but last year, like right after the session ended, our policy team sent out the post-legislative session board survey. And so what we did is we took all the results from that survey, and I know not all of you responded, but it was I think it was about 10 to 11 that responded back. And it was about what was useful to you, what do you need, and so I took all those results and put them into our co-pilot and said, okay, taking the results from this survey, what are your recommendations to maximize the legislative session and improve the productivity of our weekly meetings? And it came back with about 10 responses of how we could do a better job. And so we're going to implement some of those. One of those was the possibility of, instead of a yes/no vote, but okay, we know we want these 3 things that none of us can agree on that are good. Let's take those back to the legislature. We've also had some really great feedback from our chairs of our education committees that they're like, we want to hear from you, because if we don't have your buy-in and you're the ones implementing it, then it's not great policy. So help us know sooner and better what you need. So so as we start implementing some of these things, just know it's really based on the feedback that you gave us at the end of last session.
And then one final just comment on that as we prepare for these legislative meetings. Many times we have had a board member make a comment at the table or speak to legislators off to the side, and it has come back saying, hey, the board supports this or the board doesn't support that. As leadership, we try to make it very clear that when we are representing the board, and even if they ask for me personally, if they ask for my opinion, I will make sure that they understand it is my opinion, and that the board hasn't done any movement, taken any action on it. And so I just ask that we keep that in mind. I'm not telling you what to say or how to say it, but just keep it in mind as you have these legislators. They value you. They understand that you are in this work and they want to hear from you. And so the concern comes when we have one board member saying one thing, another saying the other, and this legislator saying the board supports this, and the other legislator saying the board supports that, and the board hasn't really had a conversation on it. So just be mindful, please, as we enter this session again. And same thing when you enter, or when you approach the table. I know, I don't want to call her out, but Jenny I saw her approach the table several times last year, did a great job of saying, look, I'm here to represent me. We're people too, right? And so we can do that. And so just keep that in mind again. So Member Lear, again, before we dive into 12.1, I wanted to share that. Member Lear, you have a comment or?
It was about your preface.
Sure.
I feel like the board elected leadership. And I know you can't be everywhere or do everything and you all have real jobs. But I do hope that you are the primary people speaking to legislators on the board's behalf. And I would ask, and I can't control what anybody says or how they talk behind the scenes with legislators, but in terms of the leadership, delegating the roles of, would you go talk to so-and-so? I would appreciate if you would send two people, if it's not you guys that goes. I know that just helps us be able, as other board members who are a little more peripheral to the experience, it helps us know what the message was to the legislators. So if you folks can't go, we elected you. I completely accept and acknowledge that the board elected you. So, and now I'm repeating myself, but I think that's a really important point when you speak for the board. And if others are going, I can't control, what Sarah says to legislators outside of the rest of our hearing. But if two people go, I think then I feel more comfortable that you've delegated somebody who will give a consistent board message. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's just my request to you.
No, it's a reasonable request. Our hope was to send at least 3. So that we could have individuals. We don't all have the same perspective, and sometimes we miss things in conversations, as we've heard about our selective hearing earlier, right? I mean, sometimes we get that, and so it's important to have different voices. We as leadership, we will do what we can without getting fired from our jobs. We'll do what we can. So yeah, yes. So okay, Member Earl.
Waiting for motion.
Member Carey, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we also represent the full board on the committee assignments that we have, and we're sent out singly in that. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Cindy. I don't even know the name of the task force reports and requirements. They just renamed it, but there you go. And, Cindy, there's always a full deck of dozens of people on that call, legislators, superintendents, and Cindy does an excellent job or Board Member Davis does an excellent job of saying, look, the board hasn't addressed this yet. We're going to get to it. But let me tell you what I believe or I think. And I think she has that right balance. And and I think we all do, or we all try to when we represent the board. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Okay. So we have with us, every now and again, we have some requests that legislators would like to come visit with us and share what they're working on and get some feedback. We're on agenda item 12.1. This is information legislative session overview. So I'm going to, Elise is gone. I'm not going to turn it over to, she's over there. Okay. Elise is here. We also have Representative McPherson here. So what do you want to do, Elise? Can we ask, okay, perfect. Representative McPherson, if you want to join us up here. Thank you for coming. Yeah, right there's great. You can sit next to Rod if you want, or yeah, there you go. A little support. He'll grab your arm if he sees you wavering. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Come around and do some handshakes. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for having me out. Oh, am I on? Yeah. I appreciate you inviting me up here to discuss a couple of items that we're working on. As a quick introduction for those who don't know me, I'm Representative Matt McPherson. I'm in District 26, which is West Valley, a little bit of Salt Lake, and a little bit of Magna. I also sit on the Education Committee, as well as I vice chair Public Ed Appropriations. And we have a pretty packed legislative session starting here pretty soon. But there's a couple of items in particular that I have requested some feedback from the board on. And so I appreciate this opportunity to come out here and share some of those. One of these in particular, I think that you guys will be very much aware of, which is a bill that I've had open for some time now. We worked on last year. We created a committee around this that produced some data, and that's our SIS bill. It is a pretty long-standing problem that we've had at the state, and I'm sure the state superintendent could agree with the data that comes in not only to this organization but to us as well, is that we have a lot of problems with that data. We have a lot of problems with validation of that data. We have a lot of fatal errors in that system. In fact, the last report I got was that 75% of the reports have fatal errors every day. And that's been going on for many, many years. And so we put together a committee last year that would work with several of the LEAs of different sizes, all working with various different vendors for their SIS platform. Some of you were actually on that committee as well and participated in that process. And we, I think, had a good long discussion, and it really evolved over that year that they spent that time. And they ended up in a position where they presented to the Education Committee an interim in September or October and presented their findings. And they made a number of recommendations, but the top recommendation was a pathway that would maintain the basically status quo, but provide some additional support through the state board, through some additional funding that would be required by the legislature. I'll back up a little bit and say that I'm sure you guys are all aware that we've got some tightening of the income tax fund this year due to some federal changes, as well as just tax receipts themselves, as well as some continual changes in the demographics of Utah. And there's not likely going to be additional dollars for those kind of projects, but the problems will still remain regardless. So we need to find some sort of solution. So while I've been hoping that the board would provide some direction as the committee kind of ended up with a multifaceted sort of multi-prong sort of approach of here are your options, you pick. And many of them had some goods and some bads along with them, but there wasn't really a driving decision behind them that would lead the legislature to believe that there was a route that would be broadly supported across all LEAs and by the state board and the legislature and the governor's office. And so we kind of felt we were back at square one. So essentially today, what I'm still proposing is a bill to try to solve some of these data issues that exist still at the state. And I think there's kind of three proposed solutions, and this is where I'm hoping for feedback from this committee, is that from this board, is the option one is we do maintain the status quo and we try to, where we can, through some of the funding that we provided last year, we put aside $10 million to try to tackle this problem. I don't believe any of that money has been spent yet. I know there's been some RFPs put out to try to identify vendors that can find solutions. There is a possibility that we can continue down that path, utilize some of that money, and try to solve these problems little bit by little bit over time. The other route would be to move to more of a single SIS. This would be a product that would most likely be purchased by the state board, and that would be then licensed out to the individual LEAs. Many of the LEAs, and by many I mean maybe about 40%, indicated they would prefer that route, and about 60% would not. They would like to keep their own software and do things the way they're doing right now. So that it is a problem still that has to be solved. Now, I've also suggested perhaps, and this may be new to many of you here, is perhaps there is a third way that might be able to blend these routes somewhat, where we could potentially suggest that the state board were to open to an RFP a statewide SIS software, identify a vendor that they could utilize and pay for, and then offer it up optionally to LEAs, but use some of the money that we've already set aside and perhaps additional funding moving forward to subsidize those LEAs that would like to move to a state-supported system, and would initially bring all of that data into a unified platform, and then use whatever remaining funding is out there to kind of ratchet up the requirements on the existing LEA's software, so that they are in a position that if they'd like to maintain their own software, that's okay. But they are going to have to meet the state's requirements, and we'll try to provide some assistance with that with the funding that's already been set aside, but that the requirements would essentially be up to them to meet. So you have kind of maybe the best of both worlds, where you're offering more of an incentive rather than a requirement or a mandate to LEAs to move to a single system, or to get their current platform up to current specs. Either way, it's not going to take a short amount of time. Most likely, all of these will take between 5 and 10 years to make any meaningful impact on the data problems that exist at the state. So we are looking for, I'd prefer to have some sort of input from the state board, since going to the LEAs and through the committee process that we created really ended up with a very fractured sort of response. I think that's possible that we'll get that same response here from this board, but I don't know. But I'm hopeful that we don't find ourselves in a situation where the legislature just simply wants to use the heavy hand and force a route that may not be in the best interest of all the parties involved, if we can find some other way that could be broadly supported. So with that, I do have one other legislative item that I wanted to maybe touch on briefly, but perhaps that was enough to open some questions. Or
I've got at least 2 questions if you want to get some feedback on
Please.
this. And I don't know if we anticipate on any votes happening, but at least to give you some thoughts, I guess.
that would be great.
I've got Member Bogus, Vice Chair Bollinger, Member Davis, Member Reel, and Member Earl.
Okay,
You ready?
I'm ready.
We're all going to go at once. We're going to go hot mic. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Member Bogus.
Thank you for being here, Representative. It is my understanding that we'll just use the Greater Salt Lake Valley. Many of those school districts are vastly opposed to one SIS. So in your 40-60 analogy, can we put that in terms of students as opposed to LEAs? Because my concern is we could go this one SIS, but if you don't want to use it, you can do your own as long as you maintain it. But it doesn't solve the data issue if it's the greatest number of students. We still have a large data issue. Are you tracking with my question?
I am, yeah.
Can you help me understand that?
It's difficult because in the SIS committee, the polling that was taken on this was done anonymously. So as far as getting raw results, I provided you kind of what that breakdown was, but how that broke down by LEA, we were unable to determine. I think it's based on, at least from what we've gathered, that many of the larger LEAs would like to keep their existing platforms, and most of the charters, especially the ones that are on the Aspire system, would prefer to move to a state provided platform, and that would increase costs because currently that is provided at no expense, and this would be something that we would have to go to RFP and start providing fees and licensing for, so that there is going to be a cost increase no matter what route we choose if we want to solve the data issue. And as far as how it impacts the number of students, that's really hard to say. You've got a district like Davis that has their own custom created software. They really like it. They understand that it can't possibly be used statewide. It doesn't have the capabilities of doing that, and they don't have an interest of developing that for a statewide platform either. But I think also there's a lot of just fear speaking with the business administrators and the superintendents when it comes to this issue really comes down to the individuals that are actually inputting the data. If you change the color of the font of the icon that you launch it, they get a little bit, hectic, and it's difficult. So any change is difficult for many of these providers. They're not software engineers, they're not data developers. This isn't their primary function and role, and any major changes just cause a lot of anxiety. I think we can overcome that over time, but I'm still trying to be cognizant of the fact that we have to solve the problem still, and we have to find a route to do so that doesn't necessarily cause more chaos in the meantime. But I don't know how to answer as far as how it breaks down per student. My assumption would be is that the vast majority of students, at least in the Salt Lake Valley, are going to be on a system that is not going to be a state system unless they choose to do so. And again, the incentive is the point of this is if we can offer them a platform that the state provides and supports, and we can subsidize that with some of the funding we've already set aside, they could perhaps see dramatic increase or decrease in costs of their software environment and reduce the error rates that do impact their funding as well. So there may be some win-wins in there, but there's going to be some pain no matter what route we take. And you're right, there won't be a perfect solution. Even if we forced everyone to a single SIS, you'll find that many of our LEAs today will admit freely that even today, there are shadow systems that operate outside of the existing software infrastructure just for convenience sake.
Yes.
This is how some of our data breaches have actually happened in some other districts because they haven't gone after the traditional data software. They go after these shadow systems. Essentially, somebody may just keep files on their desktop in a shared folder, for example, because it's easier to handle than inside of their SIS. And those are inherently less safe, and we don't have visibility into that either here or at the state as well.
Yeah, I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for being here to have this discussion. We all know that this is a hot topic. I've had a lot of discussions with people in my area, and just like you said, big districts do not want to go to a one SIS. And you gave a lot of good options here. One question I had, and I know that this was one of the options that came up from the committee, wasn't listed here, was the opportunity maybe to have 2 or 3 of those big companies. Is there an appetite potentially to, instead of just one that we subsidize, that maybe 2 or 3 that we know are great systems? And the reason why I ask is because I know districts work really hard on finding other programs that align with what their system can do. And just the sheer amount of training and integration, and there's a lot of unintended consequences if we want to make, as you well know, and which is why you're saying it takes so many years. But just wondering, is there an appetite at the legislature for that type of an option?
So that's a complicated issue, and I'm sure you're aware that the reason why one SIS solves the problem in some ways, and any number above 1 does not, is pretty apparent, because right now we have 14 or so different SIS programs that exist, and they don't necessarily communicate to the state in the same way, and they don't communicate to each other in the same way. And because of the way that they're customized and the way that the LEAs collect data and use data, they're inherently not going to be easily compatible. So whether you have 2 or 5 or 14, it's a matter of they're speaking different languages essentially, and we're trying to translate that. And we have this requirement, this EdFi standard, and other standards that they're supposed to adhere to that allow that data to be kind of normalized and then aggregated in so that we can collect it and read it. But for various reasons, and there are dozens of them, that not all of these systems can or will be compatible and compliant. So We could go through the process, yes, of providing a multiple closed vendor list, for example, but I think it creates the same problems of a one SIS. You're inherently going to be eliminating the majority of SIS that exist, and you're going to be solving fewer of the problems by you're still going to have disparate systems that don't communicate and haven't communicated for 7 or 8 years now. So unless we can find some way to get these systems to communicate to each other today, which would mean that we wouldn't have to adopt any new requirements, no requirements to move to a single SIS or to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. We could either solve it that way, which is one route, or if we can't seem to solve that problem, and we haven't been able to solve that problem for, again, 6 or 7, 8 years now, then the option of limiting the SIS itself becomes the solution by itself. And I will say, because you brought it up, when you talk about training, when you talk about those fixed and sunk costs that people talk about a lot, this is going to be an issue that's going to actually multiply over time. The longer that we go in our current setup, the deeper those problems are, the more expensive, the more sunk those costs are, the more entrenched everyone becomes. At some point, things are going to change. Even the vendors themselves that are providing a software to each LEA out there will be updating their software. It will be changing their software. There will be new training. There will be new requirements. These LEAs have to go through this process already all the time. At some point, there is a decision that would have to be made. And I'm not necessarily saying this that moving to a one SIS is a silver bullet, but if you do go that route, the good news is that eventually all those become single fixed costs across the whole state. Every vendor is using the same platform. You're not training an employee that went from one school district to another on a new system. They're using the same system. You can set standards at the state on how they collect and use and share data, because that data is all inherent to a single system that everyone uses. The process, and you could still customize these programs individually for LEAs to use them the way they want. And perhaps that's something that we need to have vendors talk to more LEAs about. But there's a lot of hesitancy, and the solution that you're suggesting is, I think it creates all the same problems of one SIS, as far as except for maybe a handful of vendors and a handful of LEAs that get to maintain their existing systems, and it still creates all the same problems of moving to one SIS without solving the actual deep underlying problem. We still have to solve that, even if we go to a closed vendor system. So I apologize for these long answers. It's super complicated. I'm trying to give enough information without taking too much time.
No, I appreciate the thorough answer. And I just have one more follow-up is, or I guess more of a comment is, one of the things as I've been here and learning with the use of Aspire and a lot of smaller districts, that's one of our issues we have, is those smaller LEAs. And kind of to Member Baucus's point, they might be a lot of LEAs, but in number of students, it's not so much. But just an opinion, I would like to see us get out of that business of Aspire and having to do the programming. It's just so complicated. And to your point of all of those things and trying to keep up with those industry standards like you were discussing, I'm just concerned about us trying to continue to do that as a board. So just to add that comment.
If the only thing that we ever did was replaced Aspire with a vendor that took over charters, we would still make an improvement in this process, but we're not going to solve the data issue unless we can find some way of getting these LEAs to communicate. The solution that they've suggested is that the state board work with their vendors to resolve this, and that comes with a fairly hefty price tag that the legislature probably won't provide. And so I don't see that as a viable solution, because I just don't think there will be the funding or even the willpower to put that in place.
Next, I've got Member Davis, and I just will just jump on real quick. I agree with Amanda here that I don't want to be in this space either of being an SIS, right? So just for what that's worth, which is nothing. Member Davis.
Thanks, Cindy Davis. I'm the Finance Committee Chair, so we talk about this a lot and data a lot. I have long thought that the state could offer not free, but subsidized a Honda. And that if our LEAs want the Cadillac, then they can pay for the Cadillac. But the Cadillac has to meet the safety and emissions and all the requirements of the Honda. Now, to the point of my colleagues saying, you know, they'd prefer it not to be an Aspire or an in-house, they'd prefer it to be something that's already established. With that, you would have the pro of that would be the benefit of that some of our very large LEAs would already be on, I'm certain, whatever it was that was chosen, because it has that capacity, and then you would scoop the small LEAs in with that. You could end up with 60%, 75% of our LEAs on the same SIS. The cons, in my opinion, of that is that you're then, I feel like we're kind of getting into a monopoly situation where we're beholden to an outside vendor. And, you know, we say, well, we'll just put out another RFP every 7 years or 10 years and we'll change if we need to. But then we're right back in this position where everyone has to be retrained and everyone has to be. Otherwise, we have to meet the financial demands. The second con, in my opinion, is that code changes quickly every legislative session. I mean, we get like 100 new education bills every year. And a lot of
I
that
think it'll be
ripples
the same
down.
this year.
Well, I'm studying
Sorry.
Saturday. No, I'm
Not
just
mine.
kidding.
I've got
I'm just
this.
kidding. I'm just
but-
kidding. Well, I really appreciate you coming, but the reality is every time that happens, we have to change our system. And if we did have an in-house system, we could change much more rapidly every time there was a code change rather than working with these outside vendors. But I, when all is said and done, a carrot often works better than a stick. And I think you're onto something with that and appreciate you coming to talk with us.
Thanks. Ideally, we use both. Carrot and the stick.
If you don't eat the carrot, you get the stick.
That's right.
Okay. We've got Member Reel next.
Thanks, Chair Hymas. And I echo other board members in saying thank you for coming to engage with us and ask us questions and allow us to ask you questions. I think you are the fifth legislator in 3 years that has done that. So would love to see more of that. And I appreciate what the end goal is to solve this problem. We have a major data problem, right? And I knew that from the audit that we did, but then it was amplified when all of our time spent on the committee. And so regardless of which route we go, we have to solve this problem because we cannot do reporting and we can't make decisions without that data to make informed decisions. So it's so important. And how we get there, for me, I think has kind of changed throughout my process of thinking through this, because in higher ed, we talk a lot about, it took like 7 years for us to implement a new SIS system in higher ed. It was so hard. The difference between higher ed and K through 12 is that K through 12 is much more resilient because they have a lot more changes that come at them more often. But I am curious about, because I feel like we're at a bit of an advantage right now with vendors specifically. And I leaned more in our report that we finished with the committee. We talked about like having an option of 2 to 3, right? Which is similar to what Member Davis was saying about how most of them probably will already be on that. And I agree with Aspire being gone and us not having a homegrown one. It feels like that is less of a burden on LEAs to have that option. But I am wondering I have 2 questions. One was where you got the 40% on your, because I don't remember that from our reporting. And we had like 2 to 3 pages of pros and cons about going on each option in there. And then my other question was on the cost. Regardless of which direction we go, it's going to cost a lot of money. And so how do we solve the problem without the dollars?
Let me start with the second question first, because that one's easier. If you looked at and I know you were part of that committee too, that report, when it looked at the breakdown of the costs of these solutions that were provided, Probably the best way to look at it too is those were over I believe a 5 or even a 10-year term that they showed the cost breakdown. Now the only one of those that if you were to extend that out beyond 10 years, 20 years, now we know that things are going to change. Who knows what technology is going to look like in 20 years? But assuming that we're in the same situation today where we're going to be having SIS as a service that has to be provided somehow to LEAs, the only one of these options that actually decreased costs long term was actually a single SIS. But all of these required a lot of investment up front, tens of millions most likely. And what we've already set aside is only a portion of that. There's enough appetite at the legislature to solve this problem that we know that some of these solutions are going to have to be paid for.
Right.
We are more fortunate in public ed that we have more options to draw from for funding purposes, especially for one-time funding, as you know. So we can find ways to pay for these if we feel like it's going to actually fix the problem. So I don't think the funding in the short term is as big of a deal as the long term. But yes, every one of these are going to cost a lot of money. They are going to take a lot of time, and there's probably going to be changes and problems all along the way. And none of these have pretty or nice solutions that everyone loves, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess to add on to that, do you think that the work that USIMS has done and the latest launch that they had, when was it, like June or something like that, that because some of the solutions that they come out with is the idea of a data lake. Like these companies will provide a data lake. Everyone can use whatever SIS they want. It all feeds into a data lake. USIMS has been trying to build that data lake. And I'm wondering if that's if you've been considering that in your
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, that 10 million that we set aside, we specifically made a change to the appropriation language to allow the superintendent's office to open an RFP to engage with vendors to solve this problem, ideally in other ways if needed, including through there's some vendors out there that have clever routes that are using all types of new technology to try to normalize these data streams and warehousing and data lakes and other ways to get this problem solved without changing the platform. But that, not to throw any shade here on our own board or superintendent's office, but that's been going very slowly.
Yeah.
And we don't have data. My hope is that we'd have vendors that already had started the process of creating some pilot programs and could provide us some feedback for this legislative session so that we knew if that could be a potential solution or not. Because the alternative is either we just continue to put it off and we wait another year and do nothing and perhaps see if we can find new solutions as time goes on. That has been kind of what we've been doing. And so it's hard to say if that's, I don't know. I don't know.
While I have you,
Yeah.
one pitch is that Montana. I only know this because I'm also in the higher ed world. Montana has their systems set up, and I know higher ed is also looking to switch to one SIS. So they have their entire system set up from workforce all the way through K through 12, and it is an amazing example. They're very different than us, but they have figured out how to do it, and so that's one that's worth looking into because I think
Texas is doing that a little bit now. They've been on a single SIS with their public ed, for what I understand, and they're integrating now in their workforce services as well, and have seen success. You get more options and tools for sure with a single SIS, but really it's just when we have data, when we have good data, because you guys are struggling with it, we're struggling with it too. And appropriations, we live and die by the data that you guys provide. And when we don't have good data, it's really hard to meet the needs that you bring to us.
It seems like as a state, we're in a good position right now when higher ed is also looking at the same kind of options to do something that could be really impactful for the whole scale. So, all right, thanks. I'm done.
Thank you. Board members, I've got Member Booth and then Member Lear, and I would love to get on to the next
And I can be
topic.
very quick with the second one.
Okay, so let's, if we could, let's, Member Booth and Member Lear, then if you have additional questions or comments, reach out to you. Is that okay?
Please. Yeah, I've got the bill open. It's been waiting for policy draft. Like, it's been at the front of the queue waiting for language. And I just told them, in fact, I think one of my policy analysts may actually be here today, trying to take your input to help us actually write something down. But this has been waiting for some time now to get policy language in. So even if we don't pass something this session, I'd like to have language going that we can at least all work together on, and provide, at least provide some sort of knowledge that we're working on a real solution.
Member Booth.
I really resonate with your number 3 option because it offers an opportunity for eventually everyone to see the value in becoming more unified so that it's not so difficult having to make adjustments so that we get the data that we require to govern properly for the unforeseeable future. So I think that if there were a way to come up with the best one system that would work for the 40% or the 60%, gradually people would see the value, and if we can make it attractive enough, I think we'd have some converts pretty quickly, because I just can't imagine that they want to have to continue to make adjustments as things are going to change and become more efficient as the years go by. Hopefully, AI will figure something out of how we can make this happen. I think we've got all the right people in place, and we allow those local districts their local control, but they are smart. And as quickly as they see, hey, this is working a lot better for these other districts than what we're doing, and trying to make adjustments to comply with what we have to comply with to provide the correct data, I think we gradually get everyone converted, certainly within a 5 to 8 year period. And I think we would become more unified, because if we get the best system, people are going to want to be a part of that best system. So I'm really eager to pursue that idea, using the carrot approach, but allowing those districts that feel that they've got the perfect solution already working for their area to learn. Hopefully we're still lifelong learners, and they'll gradually see that the new system has great advantages for them if they can just if we can get that in place for all of the ones that are with Aspire or are dealing with all of the issues that are causing the problems that we're experiencing with data in terms of our governance responsibility. So thanks for those great ideas.
Thank you. And I will say just briefly, when we talk about carrot and stick, what I'm hoping is that subsidies in a robust system is the carrot, and the stick being that ideally we're going to ramp up requirements for LEAs that want to maintain their own SIS, that we give them free rein to do so, keep those as long as they'd like, but let them know that the responsibility and the cost associated with keeping those up to date and up to current standards will fall on them. And I've got some ideas on how to make that effective. Maybe that's the right word. But I think there has to be, for lack of a better word, there has to be some pain involved on the LEA's side to maintain their own system. They have to take the burden, let's just say, of keeping it compatible with the state. And if they're willing to shoulder that burden, then they can keep their system. And if that burden becomes too much over time, because there's a good discussion for a local individual, a parent, to go into a school board meeting and say, you, my board, are spending X number of dollars every year on this individual SIS system that you could be saving perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars by moving to the state system, and that money could be redirected towards some educational purposes. Why is it that do you feel that this is much more important? When you increase taxes to cover other expenses, why is it that this is so important to you? Why is this so much of a higher priority to you than these other educational priorities, for example? And there could be, again, pain that is generated. I hate to say the word pain, but really burden. The burden needs to be on them to both prove that this is the best, what's best for them locally. And if that's what it is, then they should invest in it. They should feel comfortable telling their constituents essentially that this is why we're investing that money, because this is a good investment for our district. And we want them to have that ability, but know that there is this maybe greener pasture over on the other side of the fence that that's out there. So I appreciate that, but I do want to say that I think that we need to have a very strong regulatory burdensome requirement on the side of those that maintain their existing LEAs. Otherwise, we'll just continue down the same path we are today. We'll just have a new Aspire system that's run by a separate vendor that'll be compatible, but no one else will be.
Thank you. We've got one final comment or question on this topic, and then we'll go to your next one, if that's okay, Representative.
I'll be brief. Thanks, Matt. I think this will be an interesting political climate to have this discussion. And you mentioned that if it doesn't, as an aside, if this doesn't happen this year, it'll probably happen next year, which is probably what the political climate will dictate, just as an aside too. But I also think maybe considering grants in the carrot aspect of it would be something that might entice LEAs to move in the direction you want them to. And then my last comment, and I wanted, this kind of is shouldn't need saying, but we will be exactly where we are now if this is underfunded. We'll have different problems. We've seen that. I could, if I wanted to and wanted to embarrass the rest of board members, I would point out program after program after program that's been unsuccessful because it's underfunded. So if we can't get enough funding for this and that they change in a healthy way, we're going to have different kinds of problems, and it won't be the board's fault for not pushing our LEAs in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you. And I will say, I have no intention of even running the bill if I can't get funding for it. So, correct, yeah. So whatever we identify, and I know we've already got some data on what these routes will potentially cost. If there's not a plan in place to pay for it, I have no interest of putting a requirement in place that we're not going to have the appropriate resources for. So I'd like to still work on this and get the policy right. But as far as passing something, you're right. The political climate will dictate a lot of things, but funding, I promise, will also be a big part of that.
We hear you. We have it in a recording, so.
I'm on the record.
I would love to move on, but I sure would.
I will be remiss for Rod and I if we don't speak for Davis, because once Alpine splits, they are the largest and they have their own personal, homegrown thing. But I really love how you're saying, this is personally now, that yeah, you hold the burden, right? If it's so important to you and it's doing so many good things, I really like your balance there. Let them keep it, but let them prove that it is the right thing. And if not, then have some compliance issues in there that they have to take care of. So I just like where you're going. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
If you're ready, Representative.
Sure.
Let's continue on.
This is very simple as far as concept. The solution, maybe not so much. I previewed this with several of you previously, but you're familiar with the issue we had last year, the year before, with a janitor that was arrested after some allegations, and it was determined that this particular person had been arrested multiple times at multiple different school districts over multiple years for similar issues. And there's a problem that we have right now when it comes to, in education, we have licensed educators, which you have generally some control over the disciplinary action, the licensing, the conduct. You have some control over the hiring in some degree. and can kind of set some standards there. But when it comes to unlicensed individuals that work within the school districts, you have very little visibility and control at the state level. And sometimes with our districts, they don't share information with each other about some of these things, especially when there may be liability concerns. There may be other issues where they feel like that they can't share this information. And it's a bit of a blind spot. And I think that there are some potential solutions out there. And I opened a bill when I discussed it previously with several of the board members. And I was waiting to see, I was told by several of you that perhaps some things could be done in rule to make some adjustments that you guys could solve this without needing any statutory changes. So really, I'm just coming to the board today to find out if there is any need for any additional powers or statutory language changes in order to provide enough strength to regulate these types of incidents so they don't happen in the future, or if you feel like that this has been something that can be taken care of by rule. So at this point, I only have some ideas of what we've talked about previously, but I'm really leaving it open to the board right now to find out, do we feel like that there is a need to pursue any statutory changes in order to solve this problem? Or is it a problem? Is the other question.
So I've got some lights, as you'd guess. Let's go with Member Carey, and then I've got Member Lear, then Member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Representative McPherson, first I want to thank you. You could have just proposed a legislative fix and run with it. You were extended deference to the board and asked us to look at this and see if there was a fix. And I will report, and I speak for myself, not the board. I chair the Law and Licensing Committee, and the vehicle that we are using to address this issue is R27322. The legislature passed a law that allowed the board to develop an employee code of conduct. Right now, our UPAC rules only extend to licensed educators. And as I have learned through this process, in an average day, a student at school is more likely to run into more non-licensed individuals at a public school than they are licensed educators. And just, I think, earlier this week or last week, there was that incident where an employee, not a licensed educator, was kissing a minor, allegedly. And again, if you call and report that, our staff has to say we don't have jurisdiction over that individual. That is an LEA and law enforcement issue, and that is a gap. And so we have been working, and I think building a consensus on what would work. One of the hiccups we have run into is, and I shouldn't say that it's constitutional, so it's meaningful. As we have worked through this with our AAG from the Attorney General's office, there are two big issues that we need to make sure that we get right. And one is the freedom of speech issue, as we seek to establish a baseline for appropriate conduct and speech. And the second is one of privacy. And maybe that is something we can work with the legislature on, because we are, as we foresee this, would it be the collection of the names of these individuals who are employees? Would they be reported to the board? Would we house that information? If so, how? Would it just be a numerical report in terms of, in the past 6 months, we have this many incidents of inappropriate behavior from employees? So our AAG has been liaising with the AG's office as we address these constitutional issues to make sure that we are compliant with not only the law, but the Constitution. But I do know that this matter was scheduled to come up in this meeting today. We postponed it to February to address these constitutional issues that have arisen. But again, I speak for myself, not the board, but I would say that there is a developing consensus that yes, we have to do something. What that looks like, we'll find out in February. But please know that that is something that is on our priority list and that we're working on.
Great.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Member Lear?
Not to repeat myself, or maybe to repeat myself about money, I'm wondering, I've been exploring this issue as a USBE employee, as an attorney, now as a board member for probably 30 years. And the only consistent way I can see a pathway to what you're talking about, which is indeed a concern, is if the legislature is willing to fund a parallel system to our teacher, our educator license cactus system, which is very expensive, imperfect also, but that is the way that we could track employees, possibly, because they turn over so much more quickly than licensed individuals. So my question is maybe to turn the question back to you and say, would the legislature fund a parallel system to our cactus system? And then possibly there could be a tracking of non-licensed employees. I do agree with Chair Carey on one point, and that is that it would, there are some issues, if not constitutional, legal, regarding employment versus licensing, which the board has clear responsibility for, not employment. I don't agree with him. I recall a committee's discussion of postponing this discussion until we have the UPAC rules more clearly established, so that there is a parallel there with UPAC rules and non-licensed people, which probably won't be next month. So
Yeah, I appreciate that, and
that's
that's
honesty.
that's an interesting concern too, and I guess it depends on what the solution looks like. So if it requires a full blown tracking mechanism similar to what you have for licensed educators, then yeah, that would be a very expensive, and because we already know that the Cactus and the UPAC system is already underfunded right now, and is unable to really meet all the requirements that it has, and it has a pretty big backlog right now. So I think you're right that if the solution were to mirror that system, it would take a lot of money and it would take a lot of effort. And my hope is, and again, this may be hopeful, is that there are other solutions out there that don't require as much depth. Something as simple as, for example, you've got a code of conduct policy when you do your onboarding, simply requiring individuals to review and sign, for example, maybe get some sort of acknowledgement from the state board that they have, in fact, kind of like how we do as legislators, we have to take an annual training or an ethics training in order to get certified, for example, and we're notified when we have completed those, and if we haven't, and if there's a violation of those, then those get kind of unflagged, so to speak. So it becomes difficult for us to continue in our we don't necessarily lose our jobs, so to speak. We can't get fired as a legislator, not by the state at least. But the process is a little bit less, I guess, hands-on, a little bit more just more informative, more training in aspect, and a little bit more just a little more eyes on it, rather than a full tracking and reporting and investigatory sort of system. I don't know. Like I said, there could be multiple solutions between the two even that require different levels of support and funding. I'm mostly looking from the state board on what they propose as the correct solution. If that's the solution that they propose, then we need to go and find a way to pay for it if that's the solution. If there's another solution out there that could still work, that doesn't require the same level of infrastructure, then I would support that as well. I want to find solutions. I'm not too hung up on the pathway that we get there.
Quick follow-up, Matt, just quickly. I think that your analogy to the legislature is hopeful, but we have 15-year-old sweepers,
Sure.
and we have professional coaches. So it's a pretty broad swath and not easy to find a good solution, a legal solution, and an LEA acceptable solution.
Sure.
Either way, but I appreciate your willingness to at least discuss it with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I wonder, I'm going to just jump in. I've been waiting, but I've got Member Bogus and Member Brenton, but I do want to just jump in, Representative, and I'm sure you're aware of this. Each employee, whether licensed or non-licensed, has to go through a criminal background check. Even a volunteer who has access to, let's say they're going to be alone with a group of children, they have to go through, whether that's just a classroom volunteer or somebody, if they're going to be left alone, they have to go through that. So there is some mechanism, and schools would see, like we talk about this one instance. I don't know what was seen and what was not seen, but it would be flagged. There's something in place. I agree that there's still issues happening, and that's why, I mean, background checks are not new, but we're all tired of reading things in the paper. Right? What the solution was, personally, I was hoping that you'd solve it. That you wouldn't be here. You just solve it, fix it. But it is complex, and I get that, and I understand that and respect the work that's being done here. But there are a lot of rights that we can't infringe on, and so it's. We hope there's a solution. I don't know if this is. I hope this is a productive conversation for you.
It is already, and I will say, I completely understand. I ran employment services for many, many years with tens of thousands of employees across the whole country. I know what you mean when it comes to this is a difficult process and varying levels of employees. And I would say that you're also a government employee, and there are different requirements and rules that apply to government, for example, speech and government freedoms when it comes to employment in the workplace versus your average employee. So you have more, in fact, policy concerns that affect the state of Utah are totally within your purview, and I would recommend that you do tighten up on things. If you're seeing concerns in the newspaper about issues that you're worried that you may be infringing on individual rights by trying to control problems that affect public education, I would suggest that we could all probably work together to find solutions there, because it's been long-standing, Supreme Court precedent, as well as in this state as well as others, that you don't just get the same free reign as an employee of the government as you do, for example, in your own personal time. And so there are ways that you can set just basic standards, and that's where the code of conduct, I think, is a great place to start. It is a base level requirement, and I think that you can require, in fact, you shall require to all employees across the board. The question is what does that look like practically? And I understand it gets complicated when you get into the weeds, and trying to find a one-size-fits-all solution is never going to work. So I understand this is not an easy issue. I know it's an easy issue, but it's a difficult solution. So I appreciate the feedback and the input, and I am actually really, really hopeful to push it back on you, Mr. Chair, that while I'd love to just go in and just do what I think is best, and many times I feel very much inclined to do so. That's my nature. In this particular case, when it comes to public ed, I very much respect the state board and would like this body to run the day-to-day of, as is its constitutional prerogative, and not look as much to the legislature to solve some of these problems unless there needs to be a change in statute. And I think that if more of us were to show up here and have these conversations with you and get that feedback and just take as much of your will back to statutory changes, then we'd probably have a better public education system even further in the future. So that was my speech. Thank you.
Representative, I've got two more lights. Do you have time? I know you've been here for, and three more.
I am on your schedule. I don't have anything else the rest of the day, so.
Don't say that.
Oh.
We have things.
I've got a
on the rest of the
4
day.
o'clock. What time is it now? I've got a
We have things to do, yeah.
3:15. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you have something by 3:30. I've apologized to Vice Chair Bollinger, who's been waiting patiently. She is next, and then Member Bogus and Member Brenton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And again, I just want to thank you for being here. Honestly, this is, I think, how we solve problems is these discussions. And I also appreciate your willingness to come and have the dialogue and give us the opportunity to try to solve this. I know that Member Carey, as he said, we've been working on this in our law and licensing committee. And as we're all having these discussions, I don't think that we've come to one solution. But because we've started the conversations, it's absolutely making us aware of this and having the discussions. The other thing I would say is we all know that we see the news stories and it makes us sick. The hard part is what's reported in the news is not always all the facts. And so I want us to just be very careful. They always say that policy should not be built off of emotion. And these are emotional issues when we're talking about children's safety. So I think it's really important for us to do our due diligence to find the facts and find out really, are we solving the problem, right? Or are we just creating burden and spending public tax dollars to create another system to track something that's not really solving a problem and maybe something else could? So I just want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to have this discussion, look at all of our options and work with our superintendent as well to see what solutions could we do internally. And then if we do need some additional help and support, we really do appreciate all that you're doing on this. So thank you.
Thanks.
Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. I do appreciate you being here too. I think there's other states that have solved this issue or gotten closer to solving it 20 years ago. One of the biggest issues I think we face in our state is substitutes, inter-district substitutes. Like there'll be one building that knows there's something deeply wrong and they've said you can't come back here, but it doesn't even apply district wide. And so I think addressing some of those issues with substitutes as well is important. And there are many states that did attack this, like I said, 2 decades ago. And I think we have a lot of things that we could pattern off of that. And with USIMS being automated the way it is, I do think that there's good solutions that would not, I mean, they're not going to be free, right? But there's good solutions that are not going to break the bank with the systems that our staff has put in place with USIM. So I'd love to sit and chat with you about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'll just mention briefly too, this is, I realize how difficult this is. I sit on the Law Enforcement Oversight Committee for Westphalia City PD. This is a very, very common problem also in law enforcement where you'll have an officer that has not risen to the level of sort of criminal violation, but is essentially operating outside of the policy and procedures of a department. And maybe some sort of internal investigation will happen of some sort, but eventually the officer will typically just resign, and there won't be the funding or the desire really to pursue an investigation of an employee that doesn't exist any longer. And therefore, this employee is then lost, who then moves to another agency or perhaps to another state and works in law enforcement elsewhere. We had that same problem with officers that come to Utah or from other agencies. We know this is a problem. The question is how we solve it. And I'm not suggesting that we continue investigations of employees that, have been terminated or have left, 5 years ago. I agree that these are hard problems to solve, but I do think that just the fact that they manifest occasionally, regardless of the facts underlying the case, the media headlines create a narrative that then the people hear, and the people still make decisions based on that. They pull their kids out of schools and go into, private or homeschooling. That affects every one of these types of issues can affect public ed in major ways. And so sometimes we have to be proactive, even if the facts are on our side. We have to be able to say, we have a robust system, we have preparation or plans to tackle the problem, even if the problem isn't very major, or even if it's very rare, because it still impacts the work that you do and that we do as well. And I know you're all aware of this. I'm just preaching to the choir. Sorry.
No, you're good. Member Brenton.
Thank you, Representative McPherson, for being here. I appreciate your thought on this. I've thought a lot about this. Nebo's my home, like where I started teaching. And anyway, this story with this custodian who's moved around and hurt children has really been one that I've thought on a lot. And as I look at the school safety task force and all the money that's going to make schools safe, that to me seems more like it's benefiting vendors and looks like we're throwing so much money to do all these grandiose things. I feel like this is the more present danger in our schools, are the people that are around our children, and are they safe? And I just wonder, do we know if we have the authority to just make a rule and work on this in rule? I think that was a wonderful question that we need to determine first, or does it need to come through legislation? And do we not know that yet? I'm asking. Okay.
That's an interesting question, and we've gone back and forth with legislature. There are times when legislature says, please don't go beyond what we said. We said this and we stopped for a reason. And then there are times when the legislature says, you know what, we can't possibly put everything in code that needs to be in code in order for people to comply. It's a push-pull. It doesn't have a straight answer. Sometimes I find myself wishing that the drafters would and the legislators would make it a little bit more clear. Say, in some bills, it says the state board shall make rules, blah, blah, blah. And that then gives us the authority, and it's really clear. The problem is that what is comfortable one day might not be comfortable a year later. And then there's some revisionist history that, well, we put this in code and we did not ask you to expand on this. And you did, and you need to dial that back. So the answer is, it's not clear, that we both can do better at communicating and being clear about intent and how we interact. And things like this need to happen more often so that each party is more clear about the problem that's trying to be solved. And then it's a matter of building trust so that when there is conflict, we are able to come to a conclusion. So the answer is, do we have the authority? Yes. There is no reason that we cannot, unless code expressly says, you know, you do not have the authority to do this. But is it good practice? Perhaps not, because for better or for worse, our bills are getting longer and more detailed. That kind of signals that the legislature would like to determine those details, and they would like us to be conservative in our reach. Having said that, in a perfect world, they create a very a skeleton, very, very high level code. We are the body that is constitutionally appointed to make a rule, which should be more detailed, and it should propel the districts. It should allow the districts to be clear about their boundaries, their expectations, and their responsibilities. If we ask legislature to write their bills to that level of specificity, we are all going to drown. So it's a push-pull. We need to be responsible. We need to be clear, and there needs to be communication. But we need to be conservative, because there's yet another level of policymaking, and that's the LEA. And their board needs to add context that works for their schools. So you need to leave room for that, unless there's a reason not to leave room for it. So the answer is really, it depends. We do have the constitutional authority. Would it be wise to just run with that? Absolutely not.
Could I have one follow-up? I was just thinking, in the private sector, it is so much easier to fire someone if they have any kind of allegations or abuse a child. And it seems like in the school safety, in keeping our children and our students safe, there should be a mechanism in our rule that makes it easier to let somebody go rather than just passing them from school to school. And I hope we can work on that. Especially in this age of technology where people can do searches, that there's some way without having to create this whole new system where if somebody's fired for hurting a child, that's on their record and it can be searched somewhere. And that would just, thank you.
Thanks.
I've got one more question or comment from Member Carey, if that's okay, Representative.
Please.
Thank you. And in a great political speech, I'm going to say I disagreed with what Superintendent Hart said, but I think she's right. So, I disagree, but I think you're right. And what I mean by that is, yes, we have a general power through the Constitution to do this, but specifically for R277322, the legislature has already required us through 63G 7301, and I'm quoting the rule, requires the board to create a model policy that regulates behavior of a school employee toward a student. So the legislature has already told us, you have the authority from us to do this in addition to your general constitutional broad power. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and how that looks is something that we'll work out over time. But to be clear, the legislature has already told this board, do this. And then further on in that statute, the legislature says that every school, every LEA must adopt a model policy that is the equivalent to the board's policy or stricter. So I just wanted to make sure that that ambiguity was taken up. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Anything else, Representative?
Just, I guess, closing thoughts on that last bill there, then what I'm planning on doing, unless anyone has any objection here, is I will keep the bill open at least until your guys' February meeting. Hopefully, if there's some updates on what you've accomplished, if there's any need for any changes in the law, then I'll have a bill ready and we can plug it in and we'll still have time to pass something. But otherwise, I'll just let my drafter know we're just going to placeholder it for now. And I'll wait to hear from this body on that. Thank you again for letting me come out here. I will pass along one last, and this is just, this is a little bit of Matt McPherson coming out here now. If you haven't met me, you're about to right now. I'm going to pass along just one last little bit for the board. And this is a little bit of frustration. It only comes as a general rule. The board came to us with a list of priorities, funding priorities. For 2026, and it's similar to the conversation I had with several of you last year, which was it was very unhelpful because it was just not realistic. There wasn't enough. There's nothing there that would allow us to work with your priorities to fund in a way that would make any sense. The hope that I would have, and I'm speaking as myself as a legislator, and not representing the Appropriations Committee itself, but my hope is that, again, we could ask the board to come back with a list. We've been asked on every sub-appropriation committee has been asked to look at a 5% reduction across the board and what that funding looks like. The question becomes when the state board gives us a priority funding list, which includes a 10% increase of the WPU and tens of millions in another additional spending, it's just not helpful for us to meet our appropriation requirements for this year. And I would prefer that we work with the state board in identifying what is most important and what is realistic within the constraints that we have as well. Because otherwise, our realistic route is to just put your your funding priorities aside and come up with our own. And that's just, I don't think that's the best way for us to work together. So this is just me reaching out personally and hoping that the board would consider sending an addendum, perhaps, to their funding priority list with a rather than what I might call a wish list, which is what I felt like it came through as, but with more of a very practical and difficult sort of conversation of, if this is what we're going to be looking at, these are our priorities. And under that would be really helpful, and we could actually try really hard to meet those requirements as best we could. So it's just me. Again, don't take this as the legislature or even as the committee, just my own 2 bits. But I do appreciate what you guys do. And I honestly believe that you guys are here for 9 hours in this meeting or longer. It's crazy. Sorry to take up one of those.
Yeah, we're attributing one of those hours to
That's
you.
right.
So
That's right.
I do have, Jenny, is this for Representative McPherson before he leaves? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe I've had the same frustration over the years, is that we're asked to put something together in August, right? We start developing it literally in June.
I know.
We vote on it because we have to have something ready to go. So we don't even really know. We have somewhat of a speculation. We've got great staff that kind of are saying this doesn't look good or we're not sure, but but it's the process itself lends itself to where do you want to go instead of here's the framework to work in. So I do appreciate you saying that. It would hopefully we've done that in the past where we've had more realistic conversations. Last year we did it towards the end of the legislative session and just say what is the reality here, and then the prioritization. But that initial response is always more Christmassy, right? Because we're like, what are we working within, right? And if we said
our fiscal years don't match up very well, right?
I know, and we start once again almost as soon as it's over, we've got to start framing it. So anyways, I'm just sharing.
I'll just say that when you did come back last year with that new list that we worked from, that was not only very helpful, but we honestly worked very, very hard to meet your priorities as best we could. Maybe it didn't feel like it at the end of the day, but I promise you that's where our efforts were on trying to solve your priorities first. And that's where I would like to see us again this year is to have the state board really drive the funding discussion.
And we are talking about that, and we'll talk about this in this same agenda item. So thank you, Representative McPherson, for your time and for coming to meet with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry you're not voting on SIS, I know, but if anyone wants to send me an off-the-record count later, I'll pursue it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Elise, we're going to invite you to come up. We'll start 12.1. And let me just double check. Member Davis, Member Earl, you guys are just in the queue? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Elise Nui, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. This is the rest of the policy team. And actually, if I could take just a moment, I would love to introduce you to our fellow for the year. If you want to come up, Eden. Eden has joined us as of yesterday for the legislative session, and she is fabulous. She graduated from BYU in political science. She worked with both Representative Katie Hall and Ariel DeFay last year in the legislature. So she is very experienced in some of the education bills that have been going on in the last couple years, and we're just so excited to have her. Just wanted to introduce her. In your backup, there have been right now, as of like 2 seconds ago, we have 81 bills that we're tracking so far this session. We're not going to go over all of them today. We picked 7 that we thought were helpful for you to see and kind of start mulling over before the session begins. You will see the text of those bills in your backup, as well as our fiscal impact statement. So just as a reminder that there is a fiscal note attached to the bill on the Utah Legislature website, but that fiscal note is informed by what we as an agency determine are the possible costs. And that determination is called a fiscal impact statement. So this is the statement before the fiscal note. And the fiscal notes have not been published yet. So we wanted you to see our thoughts as staff on what things might cost so that you can kind of get an idea as we're moving forward. So we're going to start moving through. Let's begin with school fee amendments. This is from Representative Ward. So the only change that's being made to this one, this is being made to the school fees code. It is removing science as a non-fee course. So what this would do is allow LEAs to charge fees and then also allow for fee waivers for science courses. A couple things to note. I don't know the why behind this. I have not spoken with Representative Ward, but I have heard rumblings in the legislature that science classes can sometimes be expensive for LEAs, and they have provided feedback that that would be something where they would love to charge fees for. As a reminder, just as context though, AP classes, IB classes, and are fee courses regardless of the content area. So if it's AP or IB, they can still charge fees. And then CTE is another one where there is a lot of costly courses. However, there is separate funding for CTE. So if you have questions about like what kinds, this might be something to take back to your LEAs and say, what kinds of courses are really cost prohibitive? What kinds of things should we target? That kind of thing. That might be a good question to ask your LEAs is the science classes and how this would impact them. That's a good question. That's included. Yeah. So that's what the APIB list. Yeah.
Elise, can I just ask a question about that one? So my understanding was the intent of the changes and even just the legislation that this came from was to make sure that a student didn't have to pay any fees at all for just their basic graduation requirements, and science is one of those. So do we know if legally that still aligns with what came out of the case law when the whole law came out of the school fees? Because I thought that that was part of the concern.
That's a good point. So right now in the text of this bill, it only removes science from the list. It does not remove the requirement that LEAs have a free pathway to graduation. One pathway at least. So that means that I would assume, but this is my assumption, that they would have to have a pathway that included some science classes that completed all of the graduation requirements. So any other questions on this one? Okay. HB 129 is our next one. This one will seem familiar. This is from Representative Thurston, and this is Education Board Amendment. So this, he ran a similar bill last year. I will say a couple of the main points, and I think a lot of you have already read this one and provided some feedback to him. But a major focus of the bill is defining the boundaries of authority between the state board, superintendent, and LEAs. It explicitly limits some state board employees from exercising duties that would belong to LEAs that are right now, I think, largely implied, but makes that explicit. It also converts the USDB superintendent position into an assistant superintendent position, so makes that explicit, and then also renames the state superintendent to the chief executive officer. So those are a couple of the highlights. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Member Britton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As I was looking through, was the change made? It looked like where it said the board could not act unless by statute. Was that kind of changed? I think it was, but that's what I wanted to clarify. It's still in there by the statute? Yeah, it says with laws the legislature makes.
And if I can add, just to preface, there's a lot of bills right now, and
Sorry.
No, you're good. But I just wanted to let you guys all know what kind of our plan is. So starting next week, we're having a weekly meeting, and we know that Vice Chair Wood's going to be chairing those. And so what we'll do in the future is if we'll have a list of bills we'll be covering, and then we'll want people to come ready for either to take a position or then we can assign people out. So we probably won't be voting on the bills because we're going to go through a lot today, but we will be ready next week if that is, so that way we can all process. There's so many.
Yeah, and we will send out, I apologize we didn't do it this time. Most of these bills have dropped in the last week, so we're frantic. But we will send out an email on Mondays with the list of bills that we're going to tackle on Thursday so that you have some time to kind of read through it and digest. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have Member Bogus, and then Member Bogus, did you have a?
Yeah, I just am concerned, in particular, Member Britton's question, 43, 44, and 45 is in direct conflict with Article 10, Section 2 of their Constitution. It doesn't say that we act according to their laws. It says we are in full control of the public elementary and secondary schools. And then what it says, and other such programs as the legislature may designate. Nowhere in here does it say that we cannot act without an act of the legislature. So I think we've got some real issues there.
Vice Chair Wood? Okay, we're retracting that. So we'll go back to you, Elise.
Okay. And if you have, again, motions next week for particular things you would like to change, or even if you'd just like to contact us as a policy team, we're happy to work with you. The next bill that we have is HB 142. This is Representative Welton and school fee waiver amendments. He ran a very similar bill last year toward the end of the session. It just didn't make it through the process. So running through again, a few things that it does is it limits the number of fee waivers that a student can receive. It requires LEAs to put a cap on the fee waivers. And then it also allows a student to request a fee waiver for a second trip. So if they're going on a trip, they can get a waiver for the trip if they qualify for waivers for other things. And then this creates, so if they go on a second trip in addition to the first trip, this puts a few boundaries around that. So requirements on the student to work with the LEA and things like that. So those are some of the changes here. Okay. Next one.
May I? Chair.
Yeah, please.
I just, what are the fiscal impacts? Is something about could cost up to $100 per student? Is that, so that would be more money out of the LEA?
Correct. And that's a May. So we're just estimating that right now, looking at the fee waiver landscape, if we were to limit them and put a cap on them, this is what LEAs could lose.
Okay. I just, as a parent and as a LEA employee, I'm panicking about our fiscal situation. And I probably shouldn't even say that out loud. I'm just, when they ask to reduce 5% and then it's like, okay, and then there's these little bills that are going to kind of just chip away. I'm left thinking, again, selfishly in my own situation, like, how am I going to keep class sizes at a standard number and pay teachers and increase salaries? And I know. Anyway, I should turn my mic off, but thank you. Let's keep going.
No, and I think that's an important thing to note, though, that several of these bills, I'm noticing, this is just my personal observation, is a lot of these would impact LEAs more than it would necessarily impact USBE as an agency. So that's something we're going to try to keep you up to date on.
Okay, member Lear, go ahead.
Just had a short comment to that, and I look at this and I'm immediately thinking the labor-intensive nature of this for LEAs, keeping track of who's had two trips, and if they haven't, and if their second trip is not technically waivable, then meeting with an administrator and very tedious requirements, keeping a record of that, and then the subjectivity of deciding, yeah, you can do it and you can't do it. And I think that LEAs are, you just said it when you said, I think this is going to trouble these are going to trouble LEAs more than they even trouble us.
I see. I think I was I misunderstood. I think that I'm hearing the opposite. This is helping this school.
The kid would have to pay for it. The kid has to pay for it.
But it's adding a whole bunch of administrative requirements. So, which would you rather have, $100 from a kid or?
Well, let me do
Keeping
this, because this is great, and let me do this. Let's keep going, and then when we get into our legislative, I think I'll do a little more research and find out. And then when we get into our legislative meetings, I think that'd be an appropriate time for me to
Yeah, we can work on a
discuss the bill further.
motion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Let's continue on then.
Thank you. Next one is SB 34, Public Education Revisions. We talked about this last board meeting. It is now numbered. This is by Senator John Johnson. What this one basically does is it allows the superintendent to be appointed as the leader of USDB, or the superintendent can be allowed to delegate those duties to another USBE staff member, USBE board staff member. Now, we already talked about this. Member Wood has some comments that we've taken down to change that to be a member of the superintendent's staff, because there's a lot more staff there than there is through the board. It has.
We just got a question. It was a quick question too. I've never seen reflexes that fast, other than a mongoose, which Joe is rival to.
Just quick, I see the two people voted against it, and I'm just curious as to why, if you know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer right now.
I think Vice Chair Wood has a
The
response.
two Democrats voted against it because of this provision. They just didn't feel like it protected the kids enough. So I'm working with them to help them understand what we're trying to do with it, but they were very clear in that.
Okay, thank you. Let's continue.
This also makes changes the word school to LEA for juvenile justice reintegration items, and it also ensures that the state security chief conducts the school safety needs assessment for the Utah School for the Deaf and Blind. Adds USDB to school safety assessment schedule throughout the bill, and that is the majority of the small changes, is changing that name to include them in the school safety requirements. And then also it provides funds, or provides a mechanism that the state can provide funds if they don't have the 1,000K appointed for each school for suicide prevention, that they then give an amount that they can for each school. And that's that one. The next one is SB 54, and I'll please take that one.
All right, this one is the Carson Smith Opportunity Scholarship Program amendments. This is brought to you by Senator Fillmore. This is a follow-up to a couple of bills in the last few years on the Carson Smith Scholarship Program. One of the major things that this does is align some of the use of the scholarship funds to align with UFA. So this does not put it under the UFA umbrella, but it aligns. So like the caps on PE, for example, the spending on PE, or chaperones on trips, right? It prohibits that the same way that UFA does. I will say it also removes the scholarship eligibility. There was a part of this code that said that if a student received this scholarship and there was extra money in these funds at the end, they've, given out all of the money to those who are eligible for the scholarship, they could then start taking siblings of the scholarship recipients. We have never used that because there's never been extra funds. We always have waiting lists for students who are eligible. So this removes that ability on our end to do that. But again, we've never used it. So just letting you know that context. And then it also establishes a award amount that is based on the WPU and grade level rather than family income tier. So in the past, it was more about how much your family made, and now it is more about what your cohort in the LEAs are receiving, if that makes sense. This is the Carson Smith.
Member Lear, go ahead.
I'm going to ask at least a clarifying question. So essentially that does away with the lower income advantage, families with lower income, right?
I would believe so.
Thanks.
Since it would be.
More like a voucher.
There is, so in our fiscal statement, there was an estimate that this could increase our cost by $2,338 per eligible student. I can talk more about this next week, but just a heads up that there may be a cost on our end for that one.
We can't afford public ed kids.
I will come back next week and give you more of a breakdown on
Thank you.
where that's coming from, but as a heads up.
Member Bogus.
Chair Highness, I'm just interested in how many students they serve. I know it's in my brain somewhere, but I don't recall in this moment.
I do not know. Could I bring that back next week? Or
I think that's fine, but if we do the math, that can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars very quickly, if not millions, depending on how many students we serve. If we're putting out $2,000 a student, so I would just be interested in knowing those numbers so that we have an adequate talking point, if you will.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
The next one on our list, this is another bill from Senator Fillmore, the school funding amendments. Make sure I've got the right one. Okay, so he's got a few different that impact funding. So for this one, it modifies the formula used to determine a school district's WPU. It moves away from the strictly prior year plus growth model to a formula that accounts for both positive and negative growth. So then we would then use the higher of the prior year's average daily membership adjusted for growth or the current school year's October count, whichever is higher. And it removes the hold harmless provision. So again, there are some fiscal impacts potentially for this one. For us, or at the state level, so not us, but at the state level, this could save them $77 million, but then that is a loss to LEAs. And we have a list, our fiscal team has kind of run an analysis on how that would impact each individual LEA and I believe it was Daggett that would get hit the hardest based on what we know right now, but. That's good. We love grumblings.
We have a question by Member Davis.
Sorry, I am also in line for a motion, but is there any legal repercussions of that because the growth was part of a compromise to allow income tax funds to be used for children and people with disabilities? It was a trade in legislation to be able for them to use income tax money for this group of people in exchange for this growth funding. So are there conflicts legally there?
That's a great question that I am writing down and we'll have to get back to you.
Thank you.
That's helpful.
Thank you. Member Carey.
Yeah, Deputy Nui, could you just walk me through the hold harmless provision that you said is going to be eliminated and help me better understand the impact on
I'm gonna phone a friend if that's okay.
I prefer
Sam's
that
here.
you answer. No, go.
Then I'm leaving. There we go. Thank you, Sam.
Sam, welcome to the table. Appreciate that.
Sam, your school finance director. So right now, it's the higher of prior year or prior year plus growth. And what this will do in effect is remove that prior year. So it's always going to be prior year plus growth, whether that's positive or negative. So the mechanism, in effect, removes the hold harmless provision that currently exists.
Just given the trends in enrollment in our public schools, the removal of the hold harmless, it would appear would have almost a universal negative impact on our LEAs if it were to be instituted now. Am I looking at that correctly?
That's correct. The impact, if you recall the enrollment trends where most districts are losing enrollment, we've had a little bit of growth in the charter sector, so it would not negatively impact those charters that are growing, right? It would still impact charters that are losing enrollment, but the bulk of the 77 million that we identified, had this provision been in place this year, 76.3 million is in the districts, and about 700,000 is in the charter sector. So,
wow. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think we have one more on your list, or is there? Okay.
These are all pretty. Okay, we'll see if there's time. The last one we have, I believe, is SB 65. This is another of Senator Fillmore's funding related bills. So this one deals with the minimum basic tax rate amendments. If you recall, last year there was SB 37 that was passed that changed the income tax minimum basic tax rate, and it all went to the main fund, and then that was vetoed by the governor at the end of the session. So this kind of readdresses that same issue. In this case, the changes that have been made is that it would go each month, LEAs would take their income or their tax revenue and send it to the state on a monthly basis. The state would then put it in a special fund that is outside of the general fund. It's a designated school fund, and then they would have a set amount that they would send back to LEAs on a regular basis. So this would be a positive, I think you could say, for LEAs in that it would provide notice on how much money they're going to receive. It would be much more regular than just relying on the local taxes. I will note, however, in the bill, there is a line, if you're looking at it, let me find it. Oh, crud. Anyways, there is a clause that says that once it is in that state fund, it can also be used for anything that is allowable in the general fund. So there is a question as to whether that is protected or if that would allow essentially exactly what SB 37 would have done. Again, I've only dug into this in the last 24 hours, but that would be a question that I would have for the sponsor.
Member Bogus.
So I think you answered my question, but I don't recall bill numbers from last year offhand. Is this just a reframing of the big brouhaha that went down last year where they tried to take money, move it someplace else, the auditor got involved, all the brouhaha? Is this just a reframing of that brouhaha?
Yeah, so there are additional constraints in this bill for sure. It does make it a little bit more clear and put some timelines around it that were not in SB 37, but that would be a big question that I have, is if it can be used for anything that the general fund could be used for, if it's not that different.
Yeah, I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Earl.
Just let me clarify. If I'm understanding this, people will pay their local taxes, they'll send it to this, the taxes will end up in this pool. Then the money will then say, oh, we're going to give you a certain rate. So we're sending that rate back to districts or LEAs, right? Mm-hmm. The surplus stays here from whatever they decide the rate is. Is that in essence?
So I want to be clear that nothing is changing in the way that MSP funds are calculated for the districts ultimately. The mechanisms by which they're collected obviously are changing, but at issue is this special revenue fund and surpluses or things like that that could potentially be redirected into other areas. The mechanisms that currently exist to calculate local versus state contributions for LEAs will remain in place as they currently are. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still, why is there a surplus and, you know what I'm saying? Where was that previously going? Does that make sense? And was that redistributed to other schools? And now we're saying, oh, we're going to hang on to 150 million over here somewhere.
I guess what I'd say is it really just depends on if there were any savings, it would have been just reducing the state cost, and so reducing the amount of funds needed to provide the minimum school program.
Oh, so you're saying if they adjusted the minimum school program and yet we've collected funds down the road, then it would impact the amount of money that could be collected in there with less going back to the LEA. Yeah, I guess that's the question. Where was the surplus going before?
It really, in most cases, there's no surplus. It just, my understanding of the intent of this is to give the legislature a little more flexibility as they look at different budget scenarios going down the road.
Okay.
But it's not, there hasn't been a big surplus for the legislature to decide what to do with that this bill somehow creates. It just
And that would just be dependent on the rate. From what I'm understanding, yeah, right now and how it has been, we haven't seen that, right? But if the rate fluctuates, then it could be a mechanism for collection of additional funds.
It could be if we have, let's take Park City, for example, where they send money back to us. I believe it was about $29 million that we invoiced last year. Right, that's the basic rate that they collected for their county that was over and above what was needed to fund their minimum school program. So that was sent back, and then that's reduced from the amount of money that the state is required to supplement with what was collected. And so that's what we're talking about here.
Okay.
It's usually, this has been projected out. It's not like we have a big surplus sitting somewhere.
Yeah.
If that's helpful.
Okay. So it's kind of currently it's just an extra piece, right? We're putting it all here, then we're going to send it back to you. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I've got Member or Vice Chair Bollinger and then Member Lear.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sam, one question I have, kind of following up with Jenny's question is, so my understanding last year, some of the LEAs were also concerned that, like, when they first collect the money, if they haven't moved it around, whatever, they're the ones that got to keep the interest. In this case, it would be the state that keeps the interest. And now, because even though we're putting into a bucket that's called its education, we can still spend it on anything in general. So it's just another way of making the same thing happen. Is that correct? Okay.
Member Lear.
Seems like,
Sorry, for the public, we got some head nods in the affirmative. That is correct. Yeah, thank you.
it seems like one of the differences is that the state sets a rate for that money as opposed to distributing it all. Is that not right? Because the rate is what allows the state to then have extra money to flow over into the general fund. Am I hearing that correctly?
So I think, Member Lair, you're on the right track. The legislature sets a revenue target, and then the basic rate is set, and so again, you know, if a district collects more than is needed for their minimum school program, then they send that back. If they collect under the you know, the state supplements what they need. So the basic levy that all districts are required to levy is the only rate that they don't vote or they don't set. The state sets that rate. And so it has been, and I think one of the things that this bill addresses is that's changed from last year is providing that notice that the state is setting this rate and the school district doesn't really have control over what that basic rate is.
And I'll have to think more. I have to
But
make sense of that more. So that's okay. I think the more you talk, the more confused I get. Not that, no
And-
reflection on you. It's about me, not you.
It takes.
Okay, but I'm wondering something different also. I remember the auditor, one of the reasons for the governor's veto of 337 or 237, I forget what the number. 337, yeah, was also the auditor's concern, state auditor's concern about the property tax money going where it was supposed to go. And I kind of don't see that this bill addresses the auditor's concern. Have you given any thought to that?
So I do believe in the bill, the attempt to address that is the added language in the property tax notices. I don't recall the line, but
You think there's a property tax notice in this new bill that addresses the?
working here. Yeah, and Deputy Jones, just you know, are we wondering about the interest at all right now, or you're just
I'm
more
not so
addressing
concerned about the interest.
the
Maybe
reasons
let's,
for veto
in
and
order to let us move on. And I just wondered if somebody would contact the auditor's office between now and our next legislative meeting and see if she is satisfied, if this bill satisfies her concern from 337. Does that be okay? That'd be a way easier way to answer it than us trying to figure it out today. The notice
referring
might
to
be
is
all
on line
that's-
545.
And it might be only
but
the
all
notice
contracts
that's required. It seems like that's too simple of a fix, but maybe. So I'm just saying, if because I thought her point, nobody else came to that conclusion, but she did, and I thought it was a really smart catch. So I would like to know if she thinks that this addresses that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Elise, does that conclude 12.1, the legislative session
I
overview?
think for now, given time, we will stop there and follow up next week.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you for that. It was very helpful. Moving into 12.2, this is our request for statutory changes. I've got Member Earl in the queue first. She's approaching the microphone. And then I've got Member Davis after that. So, Member Earl, go ahead.
Yes, we had previously asked for, let me pull up my thing here, a particular provision to be repealed. And as I've gone back and looked at that, and let me put the motion on the floor so that, we asked to have repeal code 53E6 6046 from our anyways, my request is that we remove that and not ask for the repeal from our legislative request list.
So we have a motion to remove that from our request to change the statute. It's been seconded. Go ahead and
Yeah, this
speak
is,
to
and
that.
I went back and as I was kind of looking through our requests, and then I went back and listened to our meeting again, and the argument there seemed to be, and this is the provision that said that an LEA, if a parent makes has a complaint filed, that the LEA will send the complaint to us for 30 days or whatever, and anyways, go through that process there. And the question, once again, because we put this into place in order to make sure that parent complaints were being heard. And then we requested that this be put into law. It's barely been in law. It's not even been 2 years. So we're still looking at that effective piece. I'd like it to stay there a little longer. If the idea is we're creating flexibility in our rule, which is what I think there was some argument around that, I think then we ask for those requests from the legislature. I'd rather it be where it's pretty firm and not, what I'm not sure what people are wanting to change in that. So, anyways, I would request that we remove that from our list. So
Let me ask before I go into these other lights here. Cindy, are you just in the queue?
Yes.
If you are, will you turn your light off? I have written your name down. I will get to you. So I've got member Bogus and then member Carey, then member Lear. Are we saying we've got let's make sure this motion is correct on the board. Yeah, member Earl's motion is the code. Member Davis has an upcoming motion. Way to spoil it.
No, because that's our request. That was the motion, was to ask for that to be repealed. No, there's not. That was our motion, so. But if you go to our document, you could see more detail.
All right, we're having a half conversation in the public, and yeah, so, okay. So the motion then, let me just restate the motion. The motion is that the board remove from our list the request that we had previously made to repeal Utah Code 53E-6-604, paren 6 from the board's legislative request list. Again, I've got member Bogus, member Carey, and then member Lear. So member Bogus.
Thank you. So I would just speak against this motion. I think it's really important that we get this out of code so that we can modify our rule. And if we want to keep it in rule, then we have all the data we need. But we need to be able to modify our rule, or we need to request that they modify this code line so that our UPAC team can get busy doing their job. Because this whole thing is creating lots of chaos. And if we want to keep it in rule, great. But we need to be able to be flexible with it. And this is not going to allow us to do what we need to do on our end. And we'll be waiting an entire year to do that if we don't do it now. And it's just going to create more chaos. So I would speak against the motion. I think this needs to come out. Even if it stays in rule, I think it needs to come out of code so that we can do our job inside these walls. Thank you.
Member Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I support the motion because when this initially passed, one of the concerns that we were hearing repeatedly as a board was individuals were making complaints outside of the LEA process, and if the LEA wasn't making the complaint, nothing was happening. And, as part of the UPAC meetings we've been having, we've learned that if a teacher or parent makes a complaint, there's a 90% chance that that goes nowhere. This system at least allows us to look at the complaints the LEA is receiving. And that's really all this law and rule requires, is that when an LEA receives a parent complaint, UPAC gets a copy. That's what this piece of statute requires. That's what our rule requires. That's it. And then UPAC will take a look at it and say, we agree with the decision the LEA made, or don't we? Now, I have heard from several stakeholders that there are, and it was even mentioned in the October board meeting where this body said, let's get rid of this. I hear repeatedly that there are thousands of complaints coming in, and the LEAs are inundated with these complaints that parents are making. Don't go anywhere, but they're required to send them to UPAC. Well, when you hear that, I'm thinking, well, that's a lot to deal with. And if the LEA is getting it mostly right, that's a huge administrative burden to place on any school. So I asked Ben to pull the numbers for how many complaints are parents filing that LEAs receive that UPAC gets a copy of. Because anecdotally, I've heard it's thousands of cases. And I've asked Elise to have this slide ready. And this slide is what Director Rasmussen prepared that will show for 2024 and 2025. It will show how to log into our boardroom system. Right. So what it will show is that we're not dealing with thousands of cases. We're not even dealing with hundreds of cases. And I'm trying to build this up and time it just right so it comes up, and they're making it extremely difficult. So I will just pause and wait, but it shows that there's not this inundation. And what we'll see for 2024, if we look at the orange bar graph, and just close your eyes and imagine, here we go. So in 2024, what we're seeing is it's the orange one is measuring how many parent complaints were made to the LEA that were referred to UPAC in 2024. It's not 1,000, it's not 100, it's not 50, it's 34. Now 2024 is the start date because that's when the law and the rule went into effect. In 2025, the number of complaints received by the LEAs that were referred to UPAC came in at, that's the entire year, yes, was 99. The total for the 2 years that this rule has been in effect, that this law has been in effect, is 133 of these. We call it unsubstantiated because it was filed with the LEA. The LEA found no basis, but we still received a copy because that's what the law requires. The blue line is measuring internal audit complaints during that same time period. One of the reasons we are seeing an uptick in the number of complaints to our internal audit hotline is that parents are realizing when I file a complaint through the LEA or school website, it goes nowhere. And so they are now reaching out and filing it through USBE. So I just wanted to share that number because I wanted to put some context on the floor that I get it. I don't want to keep adding to an administrative burden. But let's be clear, it is not, I think, what Superintendent, if I may, Chair, we have 40 or 41 districts in the state. 41. Okay, well, let's use 41.
That doesn't include the charters.
Right.
Okay.
But if we're just looking at the districts, that works out to what, 3, 4 per district? That is not a tidal wave of administrative burden or imposition that we're making. And the upside is we are seeing across the board in UPAC an uptick in the number of investigations that are being opened. And it corresponds with the data that we're looking at here. So that's why I support this motion. I think that the good that we are deriving from it in having more individuals heard and letting them have a day in UPAC far outweighs the administrative burden that the average district has 3 more complaints to process. And that's why I support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Member Lear, Vice Chair Bollinger, and then Member Bogus. Member Lear.
I don't support the motion. This is interesting data. I'd be interested to probe a little deeper into it because the main complaint I hear from my colleagues who are the attorneys, and many of them are the HR directors in school districts and charter schools. We can't just keep saying districts. This information is supposed to be coming from 130 charter schools as well. And my information is that many LEAs, not just districts, many LEAs are doing what is reasonable for them. They're doing what's practical for them. They hear complaints, they probably hear, and I know I'm speaking anecdotally now, 20 complaints a day. My kid doesn't like this teacher. This coach is mean to my student. This coach is not making fair choices. Those should literally be reported. They are parent complaints. They don't have to be filed. They're just parent complaints. And we keep using the word file. That's not part of the statute as I'm recalling it. I'm not looking at it. But they're parent complaints. And that is what I'm hearing from HR personnel and school district attorneys and even some of those who represent charter schools, that is an undoable and unproductive report. And they're asking for this to be reasonable. When they heard that the board made this request to change this language and work with the legislator, they were overjoyed, and I'm not exaggerating too much, that there was such, that the board was hearing their concerns about reporting the reasonable concerns, not every single complaint, which is the way it reads now. That's what I've heard. So other people could be hearing different things. Even so, I think this was an improvement and actually a wise move on part of the state board to hear what the complaints are that are meaningful, not every parent complaint.
Vice Chair Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. If I may I ask a few questions to Director Rasmussen, please? Director Rasmussen, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit with UPAC, and we do know, is just the length of time it takes to go through all of the cases, given the limited amount of time we have with our UPAC committee. Can you help us understand what this has done, this rule that, or this law that got put into place? Can you help us understand how it's impacted those cases? We've heard maybe it's not an administrative burden. Has it slowed down our cases and our ability to process cases? Can you help us understand better what the impact has had on our process?
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. This particular provision I do not think has had a substantial effect on case time for cases that have been opened. It has required extra time for UPAC to review cases during their monthly meeting because we have a lot more to go through and determine whether we'll open them. But these are, of their nature, most of them are unsubstantiated, and so they don't usually get opened unless there's something that stands out about them that wasn't looked at. So I don't think it's adding materially to the time it takes us to investigate a typical case.
And if I may follow up. So when you said they typically aren't substantiated, so if an LEA has already done an investigation and they've already spent the time and taxpayer dollars, because all of our time costs taxpayer dollars, to say that that is not something that needs to be pursued, now we're doing it again.
We're reviewing to see if we want to second guess that, yes.
Okay. This is also a change that was requested by individuals and LEAs in my area because of just the sheer amount of, it seems like a minimal amount, but when you do it over and over again, it duplicates. We're committed to using tax dollars wisely, and I think that this is one way where we can do this. And an LEA, when they have a duty to investigate, and when there is a substantiation or there's a reason to refer them, they have a duty to refer them. So it does not prohibit us from addressing licensing issues that need to be addressed. So I also cannot support this, and I do hope that we move forward with asking the legislature to change this.
Member Bogus.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the data that was just up here, and I think it's funny because I received more complaints than that from parents last year. Like it's absurd. So that tells me that LEAs just aren't sending them in because there's a lot of this going on all the time. We see it in the newspaper, the number of cases we assess here, just UPAC cases. Somewhere that came from someone to a school. And if that wasn't reported through this process, somebody has a dereliction of duty. So if we're going to keep this code in, we need to ask for amendments for accountability because clearly it's not being done. But I would still argue that if we keep it in rule, we still get the same data, but we need the flexibility on our end to amend that rule so that it has better, it needs to be more coherent and more cohesive and produce infrastructure that allows us to do our job. And with this code in place, we cannot do that. Thank you.
Member Earl.
So if I'm hearing this body, the intent is to remove it from code and then remove it from rule. Well, then what is the difference? Because if it's the same language in both, then what the intent is to take it from law first because we're required to do it and then remove it from rule. And that's what I'm hearing from some of the members of this body is that it's egregious. So we just want to repeal it here. But really what we're saying is get rid of it altogether. And I would say this, I actually fielded 2 calls in the last week related to this where I had someone call me and say, hey, actually it was a legislator that said, I have a constituent that called me. They're concerned because they've been told that every complaint that a parent has goes to UPAC. It is not what it says. It has to do a violation of educator licensing standards. And they were calling because they called and asked, if I swear, this was literally what we had a conversation about. And I'm like, I'm not sure where you got that from. Please don't swear though. But I'm not sure where you got that from, but that is not the case unless we change our standards. And this aligns with the standards. Now I think there's attorneys out there, and I don't know if there's a fear going on that it's anytime there's any kind of complaint, I have to, Johnny, left, I don't know, someone, I don't know, you make it up, whatever. But it's not that. It's a violation of educator licensing standards. It's not just anything. And that's, I don't know if there's people out there creating a scare tactic or whatever, but I don't know. I feel like you move it out of law, it might as well just move it. It'll be gone. And that's if the body chooses to do that, that's fine. What wasn't happening is we weren't getting reports from districts. We know parents, we were having this consistently happen. Parents were saying, this happened, I took this in, and fine, LEAs, which would include charters and districts. So we're clear on the record. So, but they would take that in and they were saying, we don't know even what happened to it. But we've had an increase of investigations with this happening too. So, I mean, the body can decide what they want to do, but it's clear to me that if we're removing this and we're arguing this is egregious, then it will be removed from our rule.
Member Carey.
You made me wait, so what this appears to me is, it's at first it was, oh my goodness, this requires the reporting of everything. Someone was chewing gum in class, we've got to report it. It's clear that it's only a violation of educator standards. And when that's made clear, the next argument is, well, there's still thousands of these complaints coming in. Well, we demonstrated it's not thousands, it was 136 over 2 years. Well, that's still too much work for these LEAs. We can't second guess them. Well, if we don't want to second guess LEAs, let's go home early and cancel executive session, because guess what we do in executive session? We're asked to look at what the LEA did, we're asked to look at what UPAC did, and then we have to make a decision on whether they got it right or not. So if you're worried about the taxpayer money, let's save a whole bunch and let's all get home earlier today and not have to worry about second guessing. But I don't think second guessing is the right word. I think the right word is due process. And I think due process requires us to look at this process before we take an educator's license, before we suspend a license, before we tell someone we're going to mark your file with a flag on cactus. I think we are required to do our due diligence. We want to know why there's this steady stream of people leaving our public schools, and then we won't look at the way public schools treat public complaints. I happen to believe there's a correlation between the two. And if we take those complaints more seriously, maybe we won't be losing as many students. Maybe we won't have these rules or these laws being proposed that are saying we're going to take away the hold harmless. Those are direct results, I believe, because historically we have ignored those complaints that have come from teachers, educators, and parents that don't come through the official system. And we know that because if you don't go through the official process, 90% of the time it doesn't go anywhere. If it comes through the LEA, 80% chance that that's going to be heard or at least investigated. I don't think that's even statistically possible. So I look at this as a way to restore trust and confidence in our system. And okay, so you're saving the LEA. There's 3 more complaints that they don't have to file. But let's be candid about it. This isn't about thousands of cases. It's not about that they have to report everything. It's that we believe as a body, if this motion fails, that asking LEAs to report 3 more cases a year. No, 1.5 a year. It's over 3 years. It's over 2 years. It's too much of a burden. I don't believe that. And that's why I support the motion that's being made. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Member Davis, I don't know if you're just in the queue or if you, okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question, actually. I just want some clarification, and I don't think I'm learning a lot of things by listening to everybody because of the things I hadn't even thought of, actually. But when I hear LEA, I hear that these are not complaints that go to a principal and the principal figures it out and works it out and gives a reprimand or whatever. I'm hearing that these are complaints that go to weren't resolved at the school and hit an LEA level, a charter system director or a cabinet in a district. That's what I'm hearing. Is that because I don't think the law is clear. It says LEA. It doesn't say school. So I think I'm understanding. To me, it seems like the numbers do make sense because hopefully most of these concerns are being taken care of by a charter director or a principal. And if they're not, they're being elevated to the charter system director or a cabinet level in a district. Is that
Our rule allows
correct?
that flexibility.
Vice Chair Bollinger?
No,
But does the law, do we need to amend the law to clarify?
No, we allow.
Let me see.
Let's, I know this is great, but are you asking a question, Cindy? Or are you getting the answer?
I was
What do you want to
asking
do
a
here?
question, like, what is
Who are you
the,
asking to?
who knows?
Oh,
What is the code referring to?
I was going to say the
Anybody?
way that LEAs are at least out in District 9 are interpreting this is that anything that is standard should be reported. So even if there's a situation where they know that it wouldn't end up with a reprimand or a letter of education, they are still having to report it to UPAC, even at an LEA school level. So every principal that, let's say a complaint comes against a teacher that said something inappropriately to another teacher or whatever, maybe it's something as simple as swearing, that could be required to then be reported to UPAC, and then there could be no finding, is my understanding.
I think there needs to be clarity. I mean, that's not the way I read it. I was like, why is it so extensive? This is just the highest level, the things that don't get resolved at the school level. So, I don't know. Maybe there's not clarity in it. I
Okay.
don't know.
well, are we, yeah, I see you, Member Lear. I want to make sure that we are on this motion. I know it's broad, but refocus. Member Lear, go ahead.
Here's what the statute says. That require an LEA to notify the state board and UPAC and the educator of a complaint from a parent against an educator alleging a violation of educator licensing standard. So, as someone said just a minute ago, maybe it was Cindy, you can, even the swearing, and someone talked about that as being minor. If a teacher swears, and choose any word you want from minimal to maximum, then that offends a parent. And the parent, you will find in the educator standards, it says that teachers shall use appropriate language at all times. And offends a parent, an offender, and an offended parent complains that this was an alleged violation, and per this law, it's supposed to be reported. So that's just one example. But there are, 25 educator standards? Everything from using appropriate language to not touching a student to enforcing an IEP to all kinds of things that can be alleged. We're kind of skimming over that word. It's an alleged violation. So I think it's important to look at what the statute requires. And my communications from LEAs is that some of them are interpreting it very literally, and they are reporting every alleged violation of educator standards. The other thing I wanted to respond to is this is not second guessing what our discussions are in executive sessions are not second guessing LEAs. It's a higher level of, it's supposed to be a higher level of discipline. Not only will you lose your job or be disciplined in your job, but this is so significant that your license could be disciplined, which is a much broader effect on your property right. So I think that it's not a second guessing LEAs at all, and I would never say that what we're doing in our executive sessions is doing that. We are deciding should there be a broader level of concern expressed through discipline, because a person is licensed and then that person can take his work elsewhere. So I think that's a very important distinction to make. And I don't think anyone's ever used the word egregious. Some of these are very minor allegations, and yet they don't seem to be reported. And I think, to Cindy's point, it's partly a point of clarity that some LEAs are reading this to say what they really mean is what you explained, a complaint from a parent that comes up the hierarchy of individuals who then decide. There's some screening of those complaints, but some LEAs are reading it very literally. Any complaint of an alleged violation doesn't even have to be a real violation, just something that a parent says violated a teacher standard. So I think we need to make sure we're reading what these words say and what LEAs are choosing in some cases to interpret it as.
Yes, I would love to move on. We have beaten
Okay,
this
I'll say really
horse.
quick, in our board rule, though, it also is not clear because for district it says superintendent, and for charter it says charter director, not system director. So one implies it reaches a system level and LEA level, and the other implies anything at a school level. And so I just think we should clarify that, because some people are going to think every complaint that goes to a principal, good night. You're taking care of stuff all the time at a school level. It's the stuff that doesn't get resolved, and parents are like, I'm going to the next level because I don't feel like my needs were met. In my opinion, that's how I read it in code, but maybe I'm not reading it right. But it's not consistent in our rule.
So the motion before the board is that the board repeal Utah Code 53E-6-604 from the board's legislative request list. Let's go ahead and vote. So that motion fails. 7-4, 2 abstentions coming from Vice Chair Wood and Member Davis, and 6 no votes, those coming from Member Bogus, Member Booth, Member Reel, Member Green, Member Lear, and Member Bollinger. Member Davis. Oh, you have one more, okay.
I'm just asking that our recommendations, and not all of our some of the recommendations were things that the board could do, but it's from our advisory committee for our data privacy advisory committee. They had some recommendations they submitted last month. I just ask that our staff maybe send those to Representative Fiafia. Am I saying the name right? Oh, Doug Fiafia, who's running a safety technology bill, and see if any of those provisions he's interested in picking up. So,
Is that, does any board member have any concerns with us forwarding that on to Representative or Senator? I can't remember.
Representative.
Representative Fiafia. Is there any opposition to just pushing that along and saying, hey, will you consider these? I'm not seeing any. Let's keep going then. Elise, you'll take care of that. Thank you. Member Davis.
I blew it. I move that the board direct staff to work with legislators to define criteria that constitutes a hazardous route and amend the transportation statute to allow districts to optionally include these along with the required distance routes for subsidized funding. And if I get a second, I'd like to speak to it briefly.
Second. It's been stated and seconded. Back to you, Member Davis.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a call from for a meeting with one of our new upcoming superintendents and 2 of our representatives in the kind of Lehigh American Fork area, and they asked us to take a look at that, and they, similar to Representative McPherson, said, you know, we want to have these discussions, but we'd like to know that this is something that the state school board would like to explore also first. So I said that I would bring it to all of you and you could consider. And basically what would happen is I would assume maybe Director Litchfield or with Scott or our deputies could help look at what would constitute a hazardous route, a truly hazardous route. Like, is it 45 miles an hour speed limit, 35, 50, 6 lanes across, or 5 lanes? You know, what is it that creates a truly hazardous route to cross? And if it creates a truly hazardous route to cross, then the legislature could they consider optional language that a district could not be forced like they do in the 2 mile and the 1.5 mile rule, but that it's optional. And if you force them, it's going to be costly because this is kind of an unfunded mandate, right? But if there's a true need and there's 6 lanes across and it's 50 miles an hour, they may be willing to pay that extra difference and seek some funding from the legislature to help get those kids across that truly hazardous route.
Member Carey.
A question for the maker of the motion. So I think it was last month or maybe 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, we considered and I believe passed a rule that also asked the legislature to, didn't ask the legislature, we wanted a notice to be given that hazards can also include non-physical, everything in your list was something I could see, traffic related, but we also said like known sex offenders. So when you talk about in your proposed motion what constitutes a hazardous route, because you limited your examples to physical objects, is that your focus, or would it also allow the districts to include the presence of known sex offenders? Thank you, Chair.
I think if I can respond quickly, that would be up for part of the conversation, but because there's so much attrition in people moving in and out, I think you can give notice to a parent, but to fund a route and then they move and then to unfund, I think, but the 5-lane highway that's 50 miles an hour is going to stay. So that's more of what this group was asking for.
Can I ask before you respond real quick? Does this, the motion that we made was to, if I remember correctly, to say that the LEA has to post or say that the transportation does not take into account because of, we understand that move-ins happen. It does not take into account that. Would that be removed based on this?
Oh, no. This
Okay.
is
That's what I
purely
was
for
thinking.
funding
Okay.
for extremely busy road, a fast train, little leeway, things like that.
Okay, yeah, I didn't want to remove it either. We just, okay, thank you. So the motion before the board then is that the board directs staff to work with legislators to define criteria that constitute a hazardous route and amend the transportation statute to allow districts to optionally include these along with the required distance routes for subsidized funding. Seeing no lights, let's go ahead and vote. Okay, that passes unanimously with Bollinger and Brenton absent. You were too late. The green check mark came on there. Okay. Yeah, once you see the check mark. I don't see any other lights or requests for statutory changes. Let's move forward to agenda item 12.3. Oh, Leah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Leah Voorhees, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. I have information that you requested several agenda items ago about the number of students in the Carson Smith program. In the Carson Smith program, the first one, that's the legacy program, there are 310 students. And in the newer tax rebate version, the first version, the legacy program is the state-funded version. In the new version, there are 1,332 students. So you're looking at about 1,600 students total. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that follow-up. Scott, are you ready? Okay, you got it.
Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. So this item, it is an action item. However, it doesn't mean the board has to take an action unless you want to amend a particular request that you've already identified that was, submitted to the governor's office back in October. Now, you did hear from Representative McPherson about their concerns of, what was presented, and that's the list you see here. If we could pull up the list just to remind everybody in the public about what I'm talking about or referring to. So here's how it stands right now with your requests. There, in the next item, it's an information item where I review with you the outcomes of EAC, which is really what prompted what Representative McPherson shared with you before we got to this item, obviously, and that's why the chair said, well, we'll be talking about this. So at your direction, Chair, I think it would be a value add if I move to that information item so that we could then talk about these concerns that now that we know revenue and what the EAC did, I can review that with you real quickly and we can move forward together. And I'll be really fast. I know we're pressed for time.
If it's okay, I've got a light from Member Bogus. I don't know if you have a request.
Like to remind us that's $3.2 million that program is costing the board. If I'm doing that math right, 1,600 by 2,000.
She's talking about the Carson.
That's a lot of money as we go back and look at that bill. I think we just need to keep that dollar amount in mind and maybe include it in the backup next time so that we have that fresh in our heads. Thank you for that, Director Voorhees. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Director.
So segueing out the chair's direction to the information item, if whoever's driving will pull up, actually it should be a green sheet. You may need to refresh to make sure, nope, not that one. Yeah, nope, not that one. No. Is that it? No. There it is. Okay. So at the EAC meeting on December 9th, this is how they go. They go green sheet. I'll just say it this way: green sheet, red sheet, yellow sheet. The green sheet here is the status of revenue at the time of the EAC meeting and the differences of what they estimated they would bring in, etc. So your key takeaway from here, because your public education or your K through 12 is what you see on line 5, which is the income tax reductions that result in, now if we could segue to the red sheet, this array where they have to make the base budget changes and set asides based on what they're estimating. So let's go through this just in a little bit more detail. So you see on line item number 1, or item number 1, the revenue is from the green sheet. So that's why I didn't spend a lot of time on the green sheet, because they move it over here onto the red sheet. So you see how much one-time funds and ongoing funds in the general fund, and then you have the income tax fund. So then they net it out by taking the total before the tax cuts and then taking the income tax reductions, and it results in available, line number 6, general fund, income tax fund revenue. So this is what's available to the whole state, 184 of one time, 184 million of one time, and 362. And if you scroll down a little bit further, within the red sheet is the public education centric lines, which is lines 8, 9, 10, and 11. And so there's some adjustments that they make there. So I want to call your attention to the public education inflation requirement adjustments that they have to make. That's the 4.2% increase to the WPU and all the legally required adjustments as a result of, or what stemmed from Amendment G back in 2020, right? The agreements that were made and along that line. Then you have the public education stabilization. If you take lines 8, which is 191, and then line 11, which is 43 million. Now, if you'll go to the yellow sheet, it should be the next. Yeah, there you go. So on the yellow sheet, if you scroll down, this is how much EAC gave to public education appropriations for public education, right? Which is number 8. So that total is that in column D on the red sheet is that totals 234.4. What we're up against now as a result, or stemming from the EAC meeting on December 9th, and Representative McPherson kind of stole our thunder here, is he said all agencies have to come up with recommendations to reduce the budget by 5%. So if you look at column C, your budget for 26, prior year was 26, was of state money. This is just state money, okay? Because don't get confused about, well, I thought you said it was $8 billion. Well, that every kind of source of money. So state money is $5,915.3. Everybody seeing that? So 5% of $5,915,300,000 is in column E, line 8, 295.8. So roughly 296 million. So what, or the key takeaway of this is, again, this is not just public education that has to go through this process. The expectation is leadership was sent a letter from the PEA chair saying, be prepared to come to PEA, first PEA meeting on January 20th, Public Education Appropriations Committee meeting and give us the board's recommendations on what programs you want to reduce. So when I say the term reduce, this is a Scott term. That's if your budget is $100 for a particular program, reduce means, okay, we want just give us 80 this year, or eliminate. So there's reduce or eliminate. So if you want to eliminate a program, you would say, don't fund us the $100 for this particular program. So reduce and eliminate. In addition to that, and this is really critical, key takeaway here, is not only do they want you to come to them at the first PEA meeting on January 20th, I think it's a Tuesday, January 20th, with your recommendations on which programs to get to 300 million or roughly 296 million, is you can actually also say, well, we want to reallocate that money. You can, not only can you say, well, we want to reduce this particular program or eliminate the funding for that particular program or do it, but then you can also make recommendations of, well, then you want that money to go, if you reduce it by this much, if you reduce $100 to 80, where do you want that 20 to go to? And where do you want or if you eliminate the funding for this program in its entirety, do you want to reallocate it someplace else? So, if we could go back to the previous item and your requests for funding, what you heard Representative McPherson tell you today, so if you could pull that back up. So yeah, go back to the previous item, and here's your request for funding. So what is expected at the first PA meeting is for board leadership to sit in front of PA and say, okay, we went through and here's the programs that we want to eliminate, but they want you to pare this down, right? They want you to basically say, well, what's the critical pieces of this so that you can also make a decision on, you know, your priorities and say, well, if we reduce this program by this much or eliminate the funding for this program by that much, and all that combined totals 296, then you can also make recommendations on where you'd like to see that reappropriated or reassigned or what reword you want to use there, if that makes sense, okay? That's what's expected for January 20th. So if you backward plan, you know, from January 20th, where leadership is tasked by the PEA chairs to present what the board's recommendations are as an agency. All agencies have to do this drill, 5% in their respective committees. Then my or staff recommendation is that leadership meet with staff ahead of your January 15th meeting. Okay, so January 20th PEA meeting, your next meeting as a full board is January 15th. So staff would meet with leadership and leadership would help, you know, we would go through and then they would on the 15th bring their recommendations on what programs and how to get to the 296 and relook at this too. Also though, before we meet with leadership, we would send all of you all the current levels of funding that make up that 5,915.3. We'd send that to all of you and ask that you provide your feedback to leadership on where you think you know, some system or process where they would get, before they meet with us, they would get your input, right? So what we could do is send that out to you as early as tomorrow as a full board. Here's how this breaks down the 5,915,300,000, all the programs, state programs. You could review that and then we could meet with leadership, say on Monday or Tuesday of next week to prepare for this process to be vetted by the full board at your January 15th meeting so that leadership can present as asked or tasked by that. So that's just a recommendation from staff on how to do this, but at this time, Chair, I turn it over to you for any additional guidance or play on the process, because you were brought into this by, you know, the PEA chairs and us.
Yeah. Of course, I don't like any of this, right?
Right.
People are going to be upset. You're talking about $300 million we have to find, and programs are going to get cut. I mean, you talk about we can reduce. Sure, we can reduce we can just go through and reduce every program by 5%, and maybe it'll average out to 5%. I don't know. I haven't done the math yet, but what I'm hoping for is, yeah, leadership will set up a meeting. We'll get together, and we want to come up with a couple of options, at least two options that we can put before the board. But additionally, you guys, we've asked Scott to share the same information that we're getting with you so that you can look at it and say, look, I think this is a program that we can do without, or I don't think it needs this much money. We want your feedback as well. We don't want to just show up and say leadership says, okay, option A or B. So hopefully, if Scott can send this by the weekend, you can start looking at it and figuring out what you want to see as well. But yes, leadership will meet with staff. Leadership will meet amongst each other, and we'll try to do as much of the lift as we can as well. So, okay.
I just need to make a correction on the PEA date. It's January 21st is the first
Not the
one.
20th. Okay.
Not the 20th. 21st. So, but your meeting is on the 15th.
Our meeting's on the 15th,
Right.
and that's when we would love to have a vote where we can say, here's what we're going to sit at the table with. Right? Because that's what they're expecting. They're not expecting Matt Hymas's recommendations. They're expecting the full board. And so we need to, that's our heavy lift for next time we meet in a couple weeks or a week. Is that next week? The question, do you want to talk to LEAs? I mean, guys, I asked Molly this when we were in a meeting earlier. Are we talking about hurting feelings or are we talking about making cuts? Because everybody's tied to some money somewhere, right? That's what I'm saying. There is no way where we're going to come together next time we meet and somebody's going to say, that was fantastic, right? You are going to have legislators upset, LEAs upset, lobbyists upset. Royce is going to be upset. We're all going to be upset. Right? Yeah, I didn't mean to raise my hand like he's up here. No, and the reason I'm saying this is you already know this. I'm just preparing you for phone calls and emails, and you can't get rid of that program. This is what it's done. They've all done good. There's a reason why they're here, but we have to make some difficult choices. That's the task that we've been given. So, okay. I've got a list of lights here. We'll begin with Member Earl.
Scott, I have a question. When you say cuts to ongoing funding or cuts to funding that would be coming to public ed this next year? For example, can I just give an example?
Sure.
I think there's funding that isn't used out there that had to do with the educator, in stipends or whatever. Not very many schools use that. Is that considered on the table, or is it cuts to our programs?
Well,
Do you see what I'm saying?
I
Yeah.
think so. So Chair, that the description of money that's not used is eventually what ends up as being carried forward, right? So yeah, that would be subject to being swept. What they really want is they want you to take all the programs that add up to 519 million and figure out which programs you either want to eliminate the funding for
Okay.
or
Okay, that answers. I think that answered
okay,
you.
right, okay.
Member Davis.
$5 billion.
I was just gonna say, I don't think we should discuss this today. I think just let it sink in, think about it, come back on the 15th. I thought they wanted it by the 16th in their office and then presented in the PEA later. So, but
Well, yes.
come back on the 15th and
Well,
Yes,
so that's the
otherwise
backward
we'll be here
planning.
till 5 hours more
No, well, that's why it's
talking and talking and talking.
Well, we don't, I mean, to your point, Member Davis, you don't have the list to even look, right? It'd be hard to be like, well, I think we should cut. I know you have an idea. Wait till you see the list. This is, Member Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Are we going to have, will the superintendent be proposing her priorities in advance? Because rather than say what's most important to me or to all of us, as she steers this organization, I would like to know what her priorities are in terms of funding, because that would help guide me in my effort to support her. So will there be that guidance? Is the preference that we just move forward independently? So to the extent that that's available, that would be very helpful.
That's a great question. When we meet, and this is the reason I'd like at least 2, maybe 3 options. I don't want to have 2, not options, but ideas. I would love to have one be like staff heavy, one be more leadership, what we're seeing, right? Maybe one be surrounded by board discussions. That'd probably be the leadership one, right? If we had 2, but definitely one of them would say, yeah, this is what staff is seeing. And this is what, and we didn't talk about this. I haven't put you guys here yet, but we would like your feedback. Of course, you see things differently than we do. And so, thank you, Member Carey. That would be one of the options I would hope. Member Lear.
I feel like, and I don't know why it's taking me so many years to figure this out or figuring out how to articulate it, but I feel like we're being asked to do this with a blindfold on, with our one hand tied behind our back, standing on one foot, because we can't ever say, even if the board were to vote it down, we can't even propose. We want you not to cut taxes. We want you not to give twice as much money as you gave last year to UFA. We want you to, we can't say any of that. We just get a smaller and smaller amount from the legislature that we're then going to have to cut programs we really do support. And I feel like that is an untenable box to be put in. So I'm almost willing to say, if we have those 2 choices, telling them what we really need versus telling them what they want to hear from us, I'd rather tell them what we really need. And that's more of just a note of frustration than or seriously, when you sit up there, Matt, saying, here's what the board, and I'm not saying the boards would come in, the votes would come in this way, but being able to sit up there and say, we know what the limited money is, and here's our proposals for what would make public education better. Not, you're making us cut these programs that we feel are bare bones. That's, and I just think about that. I know nobody's going to do that, but as Sarah just pointed out to me, we cut programs, and Beverly Taylor Sorensen people come to us and say, you promised us, we need this. And we've always supported Beverly Taylor Sorensen. Or safety. They say, oh, don't you care about the safety about kids in schools? Yeah, but we can't care about it that much because somebody cares more about vouchers. So still saying, I know we don't have the votes for any of those things, but we aren't given a fair platform for discussion, I think.
Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. I find myself in a situation where I agree with Member Lear more and more. It makes me deeply uncomfortable. But I just think about this idea of 5%, right? And I think of all of the pet projects and pilot programs and all of the things that have gone through the legislature in the past 2 years alone, and they all added up together total well more than 300 million. And they are unnecessary. They are not things we supported as a board. And I'm going to throw it out there to discuss next week. I think our recommendation should be defund these things and let's keep our schools intact. Because I think that those things they're not adding to the value of education. That I could say a dozen other things. I'm just going to throw that out there. And I think we need to consider it because suspending and defunding those programs is going to go a lot toward that 300 million.
Member Green.
Carol, you've got 2 now. Oh goodness. No. If I may. And maybe I'm off topic, but really I think you make very, very valid points. And I guess I thought we approached it that way. You know, it is a unique opportunity where we can have those conversations and see what our districts might need, put those lists together, put them forward, they move up or down. I think we kind of try to do that. And so then, but then you bring up a different way to view it. What do we actually need versus what we want? And that just gets sticky real quick. Those just hold hands and skip on down the road. Like, I don't know how you separate that. So my question would be, could we have a work session on this one? I want more of these. I know. The other thing is, and then you bring up talking about repealing things, if I may use a word, if we doge it all, if there's a way to do those types of things, what really drives education, what really gets the ball rolling, and we've definitely prioritized lots of different things. Like, education is just ballooned out so big with so many different categories because we are trying to do it all. If we feel like we're at a breaking point, then let's have a conversation. Let's have another meeting after the legislative session. This could be a very useful tool for the next board, starting next year. So I don't know. I think you make very valid points, Member Lear. I hope that we might spend a little more time towards that.
All right. Well, I'm just glad I don't have to carry this alone. This is great. This is great. We are just gathering information right now. We don't have anything before us to vote on or decide on other than the information is Deputy Superintendent Jones will share with us that budget that's line itemed. Leadership will meet with staff and we'll come up with some just some base things that we can look at, that we can start with, and then we'll go from there. Scott, go ahead.
So we'll share the line item
Or
breakdown of the 5 billion with the whole board. We'll email that to them.
Yes.
And then we'll in the email we'll say, please make your recommendations of which programs to leadership, so that when we meet, you have input from the board members. Then, so I'm assuming that, not speaking for the superintendent, staff will meet and do that too, so that when we meet with you on Monday or Tuesday of next week, so that, we can put it into the basically whatever you propose for the meeting of the board on the 15th, right? Does that make sense? And we'll build agenda items on the 15th for it. I will say I did look at what's scheduled on the 15th. There's not a lot of time there. So you may want to consider adding more time to that meeting, or especially if you're going to review bills and do other things in addition to this drill, right? That you may want to consider that as well. And so could we go back just one more time, because I was asked to emphasize this by the LFA and by the GOPB. Could you go back to the red sheet, I think it is? So basically, there is zero new money in either one time or ongoing. Oh, I'm sorry. Scroll down to the bottom. Right. Well, no, not to all the way the bottom. The bottom of the second page. Yeah, that page right there. What they're telling you on this red sheet, what they're telling is don't plan on any new money above the base budget, right? So when you consider this is why I also need to overly emphasize that not only should you recognize, so if you say, I want to take $20 of the $100 for this program, you should also look at your request for new money that you made that's in the backups to the action item and see if those, if you want to recommend to appropriate money. So, say, for instance, item number, 3, the literacy, right? Do you want to do that? Because right now what you're doing is you're asking for new money above the base budget. But what they're asking you to do is they're asking you to assume, or they're telling you there's no new money. So, propose what you want to reduce or eliminate to get to 298 point, basically 300 million. And then also you can make recommendations on reallocation of that money. So.
Okay. I've got Member Bogus and then Member Brenton.
Thank you. Can I direct this to Superintendent Jones? Superintendent Jones, I just wanted to track all the way to the finish line here.
Sure.
5% is at or about 300 million, and that's what we're discussing.
It's the 5% of the, that equals 300 million is 5% of the 5,915,000,000 that you see on there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Of
okay.
state money,
Of state
ongoing.
money. Okay, so if the board, dare I say, supported the bill that gets rid of the hold harmless, we're at 70 million. It
Yeah.
adds up pretty quick.
Yeah, right.
If we eliminated all of the pilot programs passed last year that were erroneous and don't really offer anything to our students or teachers, we're up to like 250 million. We could do this really fast and still not touch like the core of what education needs. I think that there are some programs in place that if you asked a teacher if they'd rather have 10 more students or $1,000 stipend, they'd rather have fewer students. Now, I haven't surveyed anybody, but I'm just speculating that if they had to choose between 25 and 35 students or a stipend at Christmas time, they would absolutely choose fewer students. And I think if we look at those things, we would add up pretty quick and do things without touching some of the things that we hold dear. I think it would be very easy, honestly. This doesn't scare me maybe as much as it does some of you, because I think we can ask for things that snap that out very quickly. But I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, and Chair, if I may, I think this is a value add, Board Member Bogus is doing what is being emphasized is not only tell us where you want to reduce this, but where do you want it reallocated? What are you suggesting we reallocate it to that's critical to you? So that you could say, well, I want to get rid of, special interest program A, which is funded at $100, and put it in, maybe you want to increase another program that you think is working or good, or you want to create a different program. They want to know that too. So they don't want you just to come and present, here's what we want eliminated. They want you to say, here's where we think this 300 million should be reallocated to, as well as doing that. Does that make sense to everybody? That's what the end state is. That's what they're expecting. Leadership will provide PEA on January 21st at the PEA meeting. Both. Here's what we think we want to reduce or eliminate completely, and here's our suggestions for the reallocation of those reductions and or eliminations.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. We'll keep an eye out for the email.
Yes, sir. That concludes that.
Okay.
Okay.